Greetings, everyone. I'll call this meeting to order. Miranda, are you ready?
You're good.
We're good? Okay. First item is introductions and roll call. So I think we'll go around the room and everyone just introduce yourself and we'll cover everybody in the room. And Miranda, why don't you start, please?
Bernadette Dahman, Assistant City Manager.
Corinne Heine, City Attorney.
Darren Nelson, Finance Director.
Mike Funk, City Manager.
Kizzy Coakley, City Council, Ward 4.
Patsy Foster Bolton, Ward 1.
Rebecca Shack, Ward 2.
Brad Wearsome, Mayor.
Kimberly Wilburn, at large.
Deb Calvert, at large.
Paula Romali, Ward 3.
Sarissa Falk, Senior Management Coordinator.
Scott Borban, Police Chief.
Kevin Fox, Fire Chief.
Kelly O'Neill, Recreation Director.
Jason Tate, Deputy Chief of Police.
Julie Wishak, Community Development Director.
Sarah Westy, Assistant Recreation Director.
Phil Olson, City Engineer. Will Manchester, Public Works Director.
Mike Cuno, Deputy Public Works Director.
Kevin Ringhofer, Citizen.
Tom Stockert, Citizen.
All right. I think that's it. So I'm going to kick it over to Mike. He's got a couple of comments on our agenda.
Yeah, thank you, Brad. Good evening again, council and staff. There's an agenda for your consideration this evening, so we will need a motion to approve that. Normally, we don't take action in study sessions, but what's unique with this one is we had two things. We had two email correspondence that came in between the agenda being posted last Thursday and today, so there are two emails for your consideration. So that is the one item in the agenda. And then the second is adding an agenda item, we'll call it 3C, which will, and then we'll move 3C will become the new 3D. And so that agenda item is in front of you later in the meeting to have a discussion on 2025 meeting logistics. So a few questions we want to pose to the council as we prepare for next year's calendar. So with that, Mayor, what we'll be looking for is a motion to, I believe, accept the addenda and the agenda item.
All right. I will ask if anyone likes to make that motion. Deb Calvert.
Thank you, Brad. I make the motion to accept the agenda as amended with the addendum.
Very good. Is there a second? Rebecca.
I'll second.
All right. We've got a motion by Deb Calvert and a second by Rebecca Shack.
I'll call roll.
Oh, yeah. Please call roll. Oh, thank you. Yes.
Coakley.
Here.
Foss.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, I'm sorry.
Foster Bolton.
Yes.
Shack.
Yes.
Wilburn.
Yes.
Calvert.
Yes.
Romali.
Yes.
Wearsome.
Yes. Motion carries. So the agenda is amended as noted. So then that brings us to the next items on the agenda, which are business items. And item 3A is a strategic plan update regarding a safe and healthy community. And let's see, is that, Mike, I'll let you take it, and then if you turn it over as need be.
All right, thank you, Mayor. So I'm going to turn this over to both of our chiefs in public safety, both Chief Boerboom and Chief Fox. They will provide a highlighted update to the strategic plan profile regarding safe and healthy community. As you know, this is, I think, our fourth one we've been now doing, and so we have a couple more to go. Those are scheduled for the next couple study sessions. Before I do, just I think a little bit different here this evening, is that both chiefs will give a little bit of a highlight dating back to the public safety master plan. I think just a good little refresh considering we're talking about this strategic plan profile, and also give some more, help put some context as we get into the budget in the next agenda item. So with that, really just want to turn it over to Scott and to Kevin. Again, they're going to highlight a little bit of the the public safety master plan, and again, kind of a good refresh.
Great.
Given where we were, where we're at, and kind of where we see ourselves going with that. So with that, if it's okay, turn it over to, I think Scott's going to kick it off.
And then I have one thing to add. When Scott goes through the 4 outcomes, we did add 1 outcome. Originally there was 3, now there's 4. We realized that recreation was missing in the strategic plan. So you did add a 4th outcome that is about recreation programs and facilities.
So we had one, and he took it away because he said they had covered it with their stuff, so.
It's back.
It's
Yeah.
back. Okay. All right.
Very good.
So,
We did try.
You have such a good memory.
all right.
Kimberly gets, her effort is duly noted. Thank you.
Well, good evening, everybody. And yeah, this safe and healthy community it involves police, fire, and recreation. So it is a very, there's a lot that it covers. And during our retreat, as Dr. Wilburn mentioned, she was sitting in our group, and we had a lot of great discussions that we'll bring forward here. But a lot of what drives our outcomes is contained in our public safety study. And I know it might be repetitive, but we covered it back in March, but I think it's important to maybe bring it back because I think it's good to hear some of the information that's contained in there because a lot of it has to do with the outcomes as well. And so we did bring it back, and I'm not going to cover everything. There's some things that are not covered, but this is really areas that can impact the budget. There's a lot of recommendations that are cost neutral or don't cost anything that we have implemented. And so I think it's something to keep in mind is that not everything comes at a cost. When we did this study, it was a full assessment of not only police but fire. And it's not uncommon for cities to do this every so often. And prior to this study in 2022, there was a study in 2010. And from that study for police and fire, there were recommendations and findings. And for the next 5, 6, 7 years, police and fire implemented those changes. Now, things have changed in the city in the last 14 years. We have population growth. We have redevelopment in areas and that looked quite different in 2010, specifically in the Opus area and Ridgedale. Community expectations are a huge driver. Times change, expectations change, and so when the study was concluded, it really focused on that, is setting us up for the next 5 to 7 years with light rail, with population growth, and making sure your police and fire departments have adequate staffing, have procedures in place, and are really meeting those expectations. And so again, I'll cover kind of high level, but I think it directly will impact some of our desired outcomes and hopefully provide a little bit more information for you as a council. And just a quick overview, I already covered it, for police and fire. I looked at all of our operations, our staffing, and made sure the types of calls we're responding to, how quickly to respond to those calls. Staffing is obviously a big area, and it's one that impacts our budget. And you can, I'll kind of go through this as quick as I can, but feel free at the end. Our plan is that we're going to go through this entire document. We'll go through the desired outcomes and then turn it back to the council to ask any of us questions, and then we can then answer the questions at that time. Some highlights from last year's discussions that were implemented this year. If you recall, for police, we had requested 4 officers to create a power shift. We track our call load, and we knew between 10 a.m. and 8 p.m. Monday through Friday, our call load spiked, and we needed to staff up to make sure we had adequate resources during that time period. So we wanted to add a power shift. We added a sergeant. Our policies are changing, state statutes. There's so many things that change today that in the last few years more so than ever. And so we have a person who really oversees all our training. We have a lot of new people, making sure we're in compliance with all the latest best practices. Crisis interventions training. I believe as of now, every single officer in the department has received the 40-hour gold standard in crisis intervention training. Mental health data collection. We've been tracking our mental health data and some new technologies with our camera trailer, and I shared that earlier this year. For 2025, this is going into next year, is a request, it's in the budget, is to consider adding a case detective. We track caseload. We want to make sure that we have a balance amongst our detectives. We do thorough investigations, but they should also be timely. And when we start to overburden a detective, those cases can draw out for several months, and quite frankly, it's not fair to the victim. We should be wrapping these things up as quick as we can, and so we have been tracking, and then for the 2025 budget, there is a request for a detective to help manage that caseload. And whether I'm talking about cases or police calls for service, just the time on scene for an officer, the cases, the calls are more complex. I mean, we were on a call today with somebody in crisis, and I think we had our entire shift and maybe other departments, and we were there for about 2 or 3 hours on Baker Road. And so we deal with this more often now than we had 5, 6 years ago, where some of these calls that we're on take several hours to resolve. And I think that's a good thing. I mean, we don't need to be quick. We really focus on slow it down, take a deep breath, and we can get the resources there. We had COPE out there, we had mental health professionals out there. It took time to get them there, but in the meantime, we had our staff tied up for hours. And so I think that's a good thing when we can slow things down. But it's something to be aware of. These calls are more complex than ever before, and we're on scene longer than we used to. So that was for 2025 for police, was the request for 1 additional detective. And just as we think forward into 26 and 27, there is, this is in the public safety recommendation. This was a 5 to 7 year plan. We have to be somewhat nimble and fluid. And so really the goal was to come back to the council in like April of next year to look at this, to see, 1, is it still needed? And 2, if it's not, what do we do? What are other options for us? We're not here to, we don't think adding staff is always the best solution. Are there technologies that we can utilize? Can we tap into other resources, other agencies? Mutual aid is a big deal for police. And so I'm here to tell you that when we put this in the forecast, it's really just best case scenario, knowing that we're going to have a discussion about, is there a need in 2026 to have 2 more detectives at Ridgedale? We'll have that discussion. There might be options. How do we partner with Ridgedale Mall? Those are all things that I would bring back for the 26 discussion. So just keep in mind that we're very flexible and very nimble. And then 27 and 28, there is a recommendation in the study that we add an officer to the traffic unit. Right now you have 2 officers assigned to the traffic unit. And then in 2028, mental health response is creating a full-time mental health unit and having 2 officers work in that unit. I'll have a little bit more discussion when we get into our outcomes with mental health response, because I had mentioned this in the last couple of years, is that I think spending those dollars, tapping into other resources, police officers aren't probably, they're going to have to respond to these calls, but for a unit, I think we can tap into other resources, whether it be fire or other professional staff, and not have officers going to these calls, period. That's our goal, and I'll kind of share some ideas coming up here. And then our property room specialist, we actually already resolved that. One of our full-time records employees, we have reassigned that position to take on some of those responsibilities. And so again, we're being fluid, we're being flexible, we're looking to see, is this actually needed? Because we recognize that there's some other budget implications that occur here every year, and we're mindful of that, and it's and something we take seriously. And so just kind of a quick recap of the overall addition. We're down to 12. The other thing in 24, which I didn't mention, is that there was actually a recommendation. We added a second community engagement officer to really help out our other community engagement officer. But if you recall, we partnered with Hennepin County for that joint police partnership. And you're going to meet Olivia. She started with us a few weeks ago. So that is a partnership with the county. We pay a fraction of the cost of having an officer, and quite frankly, she's phenomenal. And so you'll meet her, and I think she's coming to a council meeting to kind of talk about what she does. And so we decided, you know what, we don't need that. And secondly, we actually have other officers that want to do it. So in addition to their normal duties, they also want to do some events. So we have probably 6 to 10 officers that will go out with Olivia to participate at certain events. We expect all officers to participate in engagement, but sometimes their work obligations, they can't do it, so we have dedicated officers that will work with different groups. So that's kind of a quick, like a snapshot of, I would say, the budget implications of this study is this right here. And again, mental health unit, I keep it in there only because we need to have a backup plan if we don't have something in place. One thing I see happening too often in public safety is we stop something before we have a plan and we create some unintended consequences. And so now I'm going to turn over to the fire department on on there. You want me to tab through it for you, or you want?
Yeah, you can tap through it. All right, thanks, Chief. So with the fire department and the Citygate study, they reviewed the fire department and our deployment, and overall they found that the department was well organized, but they did have recommendations that should be implemented over a period of about 5 to 7 years, with the most significant issues facing us are our response performance, our staffing capacity, and then the physical limitations of our existing fire stations. You can go ahead. Overall, they had 21 key findings with 5 recommendations. The costs mainly associated with personnel and fire stations. They were recommending a total personnel of 24 additional full-time employees, and then other recommendations included policy decisions made by the city council, specifically as it relates to response objectives. So overview of the recommendation is the council adopting a service level objectives, staffing all 5 of our fire stations, and then hire the career firefighters for our baseline staffing, and then continue to work with our paid on call portion of the fire department to maximize that capacity, and then address any of the emergent EMS issues that we're facing on a national level. So as far as the updated deployment policies, we're in draft stage right now with our service level objectives that we hope to bring to the council either early this fall or early to late fall, that the council would be able to adopt. And that's really what our response plans and our staffing is really going to hinge on, because we'll be able to see in real time the changes we make, how they affect those overall performance measures. And it's all based on measurement of time off of national standards through the NFPA. That's laid out in the study that they did, but essentially it's putting our effective response force, depending on what type of call it is, on scene in a certain amount of time. Go ahead. So in 2024, we're bringing in those service level objectives. We did hire 3 career personnel in July, so they are on board, and really that adds 1 firefighter per day, and that helps fill the gaps that we're seeing in staffing from our paid on call side. And then engage with architects on the fire station needs assessment. We have that draft back and are making some adjustments to that, and that'll be brought to the council before the end of the year also. So for that, like I mentioned, 2024 adds 1 firefighter daily. It also transfers the primary first response to the fire department. As the police department continues to get busier and busier, we're picking up a lot more of the day-to-day EMS calls, the not so much ALS, but the basic life support, the sick calls, things like that. And then that brings us to 26 and a half full-time, 70 paid on call. So in 2025, the recommendation is to hire 9 additional full-time. That establishes a daily minimum of 8. Hiring 9, so to stand up 1 station or to staff 1 fire apparatus requires 6 people. That's because we run 3 shifts, and a minimum staffing on a truck is 2 personnel. So 9 allows us to not only staff up either a 3rd station or at minimum another truck, but the other 3 help establish our vacancy capacity. Right now, we have no capacity for vacancies, so if somebody takes a day off and we only allow 1 person per day to be off, we have to backfill that with overtime. With the 9 firefighters and the 3 extra on top of the additional truck, that allows us to have a minimum staffing each day where we can have some vacancy without having to bring people back in overtime and help manage our overtime costs on there. And then that would then bring our staffing to 35 and a half FTEs total, with still a target of 70 paid on call. Currently we sit at 56 or 57. So 70 is our authorized strength, but we're well below that right now. So in 2026 then, we would look at hiring potentially another 6 additional firefighters that would staff up another station or 1 more truck. And the goal would be to potentially staff Station 2. That works towards our ERF, which is our effective response force. which laid out by NFPA, and it shows in the consultant report that depending on what the call is, essentially we'll use a structure fire for an example. It shows you got to have 17 firefighters on scene within 11 and a half minutes. And the first unit needs to be on scene within 6.5 minutes. And that's the time that the dispatch center receives the 911 call until the time we arrive. So there's a number of steps that occur in there to meet that overall time. And then in 2027, we would look at potentially another 6 full-time firefighters. That would potentially staff up our Station 4, further reducing our response times throughout the city, and that at that stage would meet our effective response force that's laid out in those documents, and that would bring our total staffing to 47.5 FTEs. And again, 70 paid on call would remain our target, at least within this time period. And so, some of the logistics with fire implementation, obviously the cost of personnel and station is the primary driver here. It's gonna take time to ready some of the stations. Currently, 3 of our stations can accommodate full-time 24-hour staffing, 2 cannot. And then we did look at, and it's still being discussed, the possibility of consolidating our stations 2 and 5 up on the north end of the city to maybe somewhat more of a central location in the Ridgedale area, which remains the busiest call areas for the fire department, at least during our peak times. And then what is the future of our paid on call as recruitment remains difficult for us. Our firefighters are becoming a lot more busy. You know, we tell them when we hire them that this is at minimum a part-time job, and sometimes more than that. It's pretty demanding with all the training and the duty crew shifts and the callbacks, and it's just becoming more and more difficult for them. So we're going to continue to look on that. At that, we're going to continue to recruit as aggressively as we can. We typically right now target a once a year hire on those, and we did just bring on 8 this spring, so they're currently in training now and should be coming online probably by early fall once they finish their EMT training. So that'll help quite a bit. And then we look at the mental health response with the police department on putting something together with that, and then continue to monitor our service level objectives and outcomes. And again, we're gonna have to be very nimble on this because some of it may have to do with when can we get the stations up online, depending on what we do with them, and particularly Station 2 and 5 up on the north end there. Go ahead. So that's just the summary right there. We did 3 this year. Now we did apply for a SAFER grant. That's the federal FEMA grant for firefighter staffing. They just started awarding those last week. So we're hopeful on that, but it really is a lottery. Nowadays, I think they had 2,700 fire departments apply for it this year for a share of 350-ish million. But you know, if we were awarded that, that's funding for 18 firefighters right away. So, and that's a 3-year fully funded grant. So we will continue to watch for that and hopefully hear some positive news. And then 9 in 2025, 6 in 26, and 6 in 24 or 27. Excuse me.
So Chief, just a quick question on that last chart. So we pushed off 6, and that's why it would have been 6 a year, but then we pushed.
Yeah, so we had originally asked for 6 for
last year.
Yeah, well, for hire this year.
Right.
And yeah, we trimmed that back to 3, and so then that's why next year is 9. Yeah, because you're correct. It would have been 6 every year.
Right. Thanks.
All right, so I'm going to take it back. So that was a lot of information, a lot. Especially these are like, you know, major budget implications. But I think it's a 5-year plan, but it's an aggressive plan. I mean, you're adding a lot of people, and so we recognize that. And so how we weave it into our strategic priority. In fact, you know, even before we changed our definition and some of our outcomes, we always were working off of the plan. That is our roadmap. It's providing guidance to police and fire on the next 5 to 7 years, knowing that hopefully upon completion, we're setting ourselves up for it to be in a pretty good place, ready to take on any sort of issue. And so as I weave it into here, I'll talk about what we designed here, and then circle back with the council to then open it up to just discussion, even covering what we just talked about, if that works. Okay. So when we did meet, again, we didn't spend a lot of time on our retreat talking about this. I think we had maybe a half hour, but I think the consultant really got us to focus on outcomes, on what was our desired outcome, and provided some direction and scope. And so there was a change to the definition, and I assume that's part of the discussion, right? To make sure we're all in alignment with what we kind of designed here for instead of saying a safe, healthy community, which is somewhat redundant to what the priority is, we added some language, as you can see it there. Create initiatives to enhance community well-being, engage residents to build trust, and prioritize programs, education, hazard mitigation, and emergency response. Again, it's not just about public safety, it's about well-being of the community, and that's why you see recreation in alignment here as well with some of the work that they do. We do have 4 desired outcomes. The first one is where it's focused heavily on the public safety master plan, and that again is something that impacts our budget, so it's important for us to report on that. And what you see as a performance metrics there is that overall numbers, and so when you see staffing requests, you may wonder, well, where are we at now and where we need to go, and how does progress look, what does it look like in 24, 25, and 26? So that's one of the metrics. And then response time for fire and EMS. And as I mentioned before, one thing we want to make sure is we balance workload. If we have detectives we track their cases, and we want to make sure we balance that out. Target obviously is for us is to meet the recommendations as indicated in the Public Safety Master Plan. Fire has some service level objectives that I think will come forward at some point to the council. And then our goal, if we're adding detective, would be to decrease caseload for other detectives. And so it's good to have a goal. 10%, I think it's fair. So that's that first desired outcome, is really focused on the Public Safety Master Plan. The second one, and it was somewhat, it talked a little bit about this in the prior definition, but it's ensure public safety readiness for the Opus area redevelopment. And with light rail, we meet regularly with Metro Transit, making sure we have procedures in place for how we're going to handle the rail, who's responsible, whose jurisdiction. We work with St. Louis Park, Hawkins, Eden Prairie. I know fire has their own training working with, what about an emergency with the rail, fire, hazardous materials. And so that's been ongoing. But we also want to monitor, anytime we have an area like Opus, that there's a lot more people that live there. And so we have more people falling down, there's more accidents, there's more activity. So as you can imagine, if you increase housing in an area, there's going to be more calls for service. And we've seen that increase. We've adjusted our district maps, and so the car that maybe used to come up to Minnetonka Boulevard now has to only come up to Highway 7, because I need that car to stay further south, because we have more call volume in the Opus area. And so one of the areas we want to monitor is the call volume, to make sure that we adjust as needed, and then as we recognize the development, the number of units. I mean, there are studies out there that'll tell you if you have 300 units, this is the impact of public safety, and it's not all driven by crime. I mean, it's medicals, it's lift assist, it's my neighbor's got the music too loud. I'm not going to say the phrase shared walls. When you have shared walls, there's more nuisance, quality of life issues, and that's just the way it is. And so as we see the numbers increase, we respond accordingly. And so we want to make sure we track that. So when it does open in 2027, we're ready. And then we're also looking for opportunities to partner, whether it's a storefront with leaning on community development. If they have a developer, if we could gain some square footage and put a storefront, so we have visibility, we have easy access to the trail system, and so we're looking for those opportunities too. So that's all kind of embedded in that desired outcome. The third one is enhanced mental health and I'm going to spend just a few minutes on that because it's an area that, you know, in law enforcement we've recognized is, you know, it's those, you know, it is a low occurrence. So we may deal with 400 to 500 mental health calls for calls a year, but that's a call that you need to make sure you have the right resources there. And so I'm a little, you know, disappointed that, you know, some of our county partners haven't really stepped up. There's been pilot programs in other cities that have been very effective in reducing repeat calls for service, use of force, and yet it seems like it seems a little slow to pick up some momentum in the county. And so we want to really maybe take this more in-house. And so as you know, we have a embedded social worker from Hennepin County. In 2023, we pay about $74,000 for that agreement. In 2020, it's going up to $88,000 next year. And I have no control over roles and responsibilities and really job description. And so timing is everything for us, and we're looking at bringing on our full-time social worker as a city social worker that can not only help us design a program that has fire co-respond with mental health professionals, whether it be our mental health, our social worker, and really taking police out of the equation, really taking the model of other cities that have done this and not waiting for the county to do this and bringing it in-house. Like I said, we pay about $88,000. I can tell you the salary isn't much more than that to have our own social worker. It also benefits other departments. Right now, it's more of a follow-up care. So officers get a call of a person in crisis. They go, they handle it. They submit a report to the social worker. Social worker the next day will come in and look at it, see if they've got a caseworker, reach out and do that work. This actually takes it more on the proactive side. So the call comes in, it gets triaged, and then we send either fire staff or our social worker to the scene, and we're not sending police. And so for me to do that, I would like to bring her in-house and have some control over the roles and responsibilities. And so we are looking at terminating that contract like soon. Again, we're paying quite a bit of money for it already, and I just think it would provide a better resource for us here, especially citywide. So that's where we're at with that one. And some of the areas we're tracking are mental health calls. And ideally, I'd like to say we're going to reduce mental health calls by a percentage. The truth is it's not going to happen. But we know that we deal with some folks who are repeat calls for service. We're dealing with one right now that I think we've been out there maybe a dozen times in the last few days. We want to try to stop that because we know if we continue to go, at some point that's where an encounter could go in a different direction, and we don't want that. And so we're pretty happy with the progress we've made, that we can reduce our repeat calls for service. And I know just from talking to her, I mean, you know, if you know Kelly, I mean, just an example, she worked with a single adult male who struggled with opiate use. He's being evicted while in treatment, sober house. He's losing his housing, and she's working with him directly. She's driving him around, and she does this, and I know she's within her parameters as a county employee, but I know she could be doing a lot more outside those restrictions that she has. And so that's just an example of what she does right now, and she'd like to continue to do that. So use of force related to mental health calls. So anytime an officer puts hands on somebody, when you think of use of force, people think of they're using a taser or some sort of baton. If I were to use my hands and physically grab Kevin and walk him, we track that as a use of force. And I know from studies, especially in Brooklyn Park, they were able to reduce that by 40-some%. I can tell you, anytime we can keep our hands off people, that's a good outcome. And so when I hear that they're reducing their use of force, they're reducing their repeat calls for service by 40-50%, that's pretty impressive. And I want to do the same thing.
Park or Brooklyn?
Brooklyn Park. Yeah. And so that's a pretty heavy focus for us, is really enhancing that. And so I thought we wanted to make sure we include that. And then the last one is recreation, and their outcome is to expand participation and membership in recreation program and facilities. And an area that they'll track is the program participation and membership numbers. And they have a target to improve programming numbers and March membership by 5%. So, you know, there's 4 there, but each one of those contain a lot of, like we would call action steps to get to that desired outcome. So I think I'll stop there and turn it back to all of you
Yeah,
for questions, and then one of us will, whoever it's directed to, will answer.
great. Council questions for either chief or both? Anything?
I guess I got a question.
Kizzy, go ahead.
I guess I got a question. When you say hiring a full-time social worker, the social worker will be used to respond to calls that don't require police. And I'm just wondering, you know, not a social worker, but like when you think about the need of the calls, will we have enough? Will one social worker be enough to respond to that many calls for one city? Because that's I mean, I just can't see where one social worker would be able to provide enough services for our city when we have different calls that don't require police. I know as being part of the 60-member organization that deals with this this pilot program in Brooklyn Park and St. Paul, they are triaging the calls to several different places, and police is not coming, but they're using multiple different resources. And so I'm thinking about, is the social worker going to be triaging calls, or will the social worker be responding to calls?
Yeah, that's a great question. And you are absolutely correct. You cannot staff enough social workers 24/7 because our calls don't end at 4:30. Absolutely correct. So what the Brooklyn Park model was a grant, and they had a community paramedic that was a North Memorial paramedic assigned to a social worker. And there was more than one. They had shifts, and I don't know if they would work 24/7, but they had multiple shifts. And so they would respond. So the call would come into 911. 911 would just send them. And that worked out well. And I think it's phenomenal. It's great. I think, you know, when you partnering with like North Memorial or Hennepin Healthcare, the cost of a paramedic is expensive, or, you know, when you contract with them. And I know this from talking to Hennepin County. So our design is somewhat kind of like a hybrid. So Kelly, our social worker, would design a program, train fire staff. We always have to have police trained because there is so much overlap. However, if the social worker is working and they can respond in real time, absolutely they should go. But as I see fire bring on more staff, and those folks are trained, and some of these folks are EMTs and have quite high level of training in medical. So why wouldn't we partner with somebody who we already have on staff that's being paid for by the city versus me contracting and having a paramedic? And so that's kind of a hybrid, Kizzy. But so the difficult part is we don't own our own dispatch. So we have to figure out when a call comes in, can we triage it from our level and then direct the right resources? And this might just not be at mental health. This could be just in medical response in general. And really triage it from our level and then send either fire trained staff or a combination of our social worker if she's working with fire. And we may have to have officers. We have a mental health unit now, so we have a group of officers who do aftercare that go out because Kelly can't go out to every call by herself. There are sometimes she has to go with an officer just for reasons like, you know, it could be a variety of reasons. And so we will have, but the goal is to remove police from that initial response. Okay. And as best we can without hiring a whole bunch of social workers because they may sit all night long and not get a call. Mm-hmm. And so it would be nice to have more, but there's also money's not endless. So we're trying to, and there's a couple of cities down south that have done this with their fire department. Here in Minnesota, it's been more partnering with the medical like North or Hennepin, and then the social worker. I don't know if that, so it's kind of a hybrid, more to come, but that's why I want to bring Kelly on in-house. That way we can say, hey, I want you to help design this. We need to figure out what this looks like. What kind of training can you provide? What kind of resources? Who are our local partners? Who can we tap into? Whether, there's a variety of things that we can do, but right now we just have some restrictions because she's a follow-up embedded social worker that really her job description is not that.
Okay, thank you.
Follow-up, Rebecca?
Yeah, I would just kind of piggyback on all that. I guess what I would envision, and I anticipate maybe this is what staff is thinking, is that as this starts to evolve, there's going to be more overlap where some professionals are going to have a social work role, but they're going to already be in the budget as a full-time fire or some version of the community engagement officer or whatever to try to meet that. Like, the role of public safety is now starting to be more malleable, and it's not like a hammer for every problem. So I think this is a good first step, and I'll just quickly say, I mean, I think I like everything on this part of the profile. I think the description's a little wordy, but I've been thinking about it. It's okay. Otherwise, it looks good to me.
Yeah, that's why in 2028 mental health cops, I would rather see that need go to, if fire picks up that responsibility, then I don't need 2 cops. I mean, that's what we're looking at, is something like that. Because again, we've always worked very well with our public safety partners. I just think that as we see fire ramp up and have more accessibility and more resources, why wouldn't we, utilize those resources?
And I
Kimberly?
appreciate you talking a little bit about dispatch, because since I've been on, we had our own dispatch, and just wondering how the whole how the assignment would work, out of dispatch, since we can't control it. And so I still wonder about that a little bit, but yeah.
I was the chief that got rid of dispatch, but we were looking at remodeling. It was very expensive, but we do lose a little control when we don't have our own dispatch. And so, for example, if we had our own dispatch, they could easily triage it. It would be seamless. I haven't severed ties with Hennepin County Social Services with our social worker. I mean, once that happens, I'm confident that the sheriff's office will maybe work with us on what that could look like if someone were to call. I mean, we always can find solutions. When a call comes, we could always say, okay, pause for it. Let's see who can go. Fire can go. Ideally, it'd be nice if they can triage it from the county, from our dispatch center. I'm going to have that conversation with them once we move down, once we take this next step. But it is a hurdle, and we'll look through it. But I think we're working in the right direction.
Kimberly?
Yeah, excuse me. So Mike already shared this with me, but I assume it's going to come up when we get to the budget. So can you tell us what percentage of the salary for the social worker we're paying now from Hennepin County?
Yeah, so this year it's about $75,000. In 2025, it goes to $88,000. Her salary is about $98,000.
Okay.
So it's very close. Now we have benefits, there's some other additional, but right now we pay for the social worker and we pay some administrative, because they have their own oversight. They've got a supervisor who oversees the work that she does, so we're paying for part of that. And so when we started to look at that, we have all that oversight. I see the value in the citywide. I mean, it's not just police that deal with folks in need. It could be recreation with senior services may have a need to work with somebody on housing. I mean, it just opens the doors, and I think this provides us the opportunity to really take advantage of those.
Yeah, Patsy?
So this has to do with fire, and so you said based on the hiring that happened, it was essentially 1 firefighter per day.
For 2024, yes.
And so, do we know how that has affected response time? I mean,
so far, it hasn't been so much to do with response time as it's been to fill gaps.
Okay.
So right now, our staffing is what we would call a minimum. So if somebody is off, we have to fill that with overtime. And then when we hired these 3, not only do they help fill the gap if somebody is off, but we also are seeing gaps on our paid on call side. So we had, for instance, in the first or second quarter here this year, we had, let's see, 177 shifts that were not filled by our paid on call. So then if those aren't filled, we either have to drop down a truck. So normally we would try to staff 3 trucks between our full-time and our paid on call. So if we don't get those filled with our paid on call, we either have to shut a truck down and go down to 2 trucks, or we have to call in for overtime. So these 3 that we hired helped kind of fill that gap so we can keep that 3rd truck in service. Because right for the second quarter, 38% of our calls were overlapping, which meant we had 2 or more calls going on at the same time. And if we only have 2 trucks on duty, that means they're both tied up and we don't have anything available for any other calls that come in.
So, and then, so obviously overtime is it's expensive. So that's what I kind of want to find, get a sense of, so you filled that gap. So how much money have we saved?
I don't have the answer to yet. I don't have an answer for that yet.
I mean, just a general idea would be, not now, but to know this, how that.
Yeah, I think by next year, we'll have a better understanding of how the hiring's affected our overtime. We're so new into this realm still that I think last year was the first year we even had an overtime budget. Because we never needed it previously. So going through last year and this year, and then I think by next year we'll kind of have a benchmark as to what were our overtime costs, and then we'll be able to see a correlation once we bring the staffing level up on what our savings are. You know, there's always going to be some overtime, but we'll have a lot more flexibility because we won't have to auto trigger it every time somebody takes off. We'll have some wiggle room that we can have 1 or 2 vacancies and not have to necessarily fill those back.
Other questions, Paula?
Thank you. Yeah, you were talking about overlapping calls that were happening. Now, are those fires or were those medical calls? And how many of each are we looking at for 2024 so far? How are we?
So they're all our calls. So any call for service. So we're in all hazards. So we.
And then when you say trucks, does that mean that that's fire trucks that are responding?
Yeah, it's a staffed apparatus. So it could be a rescue, it could be a pumper truck, it could be a ladder truck.
Okay.
But everyone has to be staffed with at least 2. That's our minimum staffing.
Okay.
So I can tell you in quarter 2, I don't think it breaks down what the specific calls were that are overlapping.
Okay.
But yeah, 38% of the time we have 2 or more calls going on at the same time.
Okay. And so we don't know how many of those were fire versus medical.
Not the overlapping, no.
Okay. And then just in general, do we have that information?
Yes. I can go off our 2023 data.
Okay.
Last year was 3,900 emergency medical calls. We had 176 motor vehicle accidents, 53 rescues. Between fires in our city and mutual aid incidents, we were sitting at about 150. We had 635 service calls, 246 hazardous materials calls or hazardous condition calls, and then 531 false alarms.
And so, I'm sorry, how many, you said 246 hazmat, so that required a pumper truck, I guess?
Yeah, so it's anything from a gas leak to a fuel spill, any type of hazardous, we go to respond to some of our manufacturing facilities when they have incidents there. Yep.
Okay, So the vast majority are EMS calls, it looks like?
Yeah, about 75%.
75%,
Yeah.
okay. Thank you.
Mike?
I was going to mention, there is for a lot of detailed information in the annual report, so any of those can be found online. So on our website, if you want to take a deep dive into any of the annual police or fire reports, those are available, where it breaks down all of the calls. So there's additional resources.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I want to be mindful of time because we do have a few things on the agenda, so, but these reports have been helpful. Is there any other pressing questions anyone has? Otherwise, we'll keep moving. The questions that we have for this, let me just make sure.
Right
that-
there, Mayor.
Right there, okay, very good. Well, they're here too, but, thank you. So, these are the things that staff wants direction on, affirm the description for the safe and healthy community, the stuff that was on our grid. Do we affirm the 4 desired outcomes, and do we affirm the performance metrics and targets? So they've been reviewed, and anything from this that you have any concerns about or comments on? Or do we all want to affirm? I'm going to make one quick comment. On the desired outcome on the middle of the page here, ensure public safety readiness for the Opus area redevelopment. When I read that, I thought, well, that sounds kind of tactical. It's only one part of the city. But it's clear that is the most dynamic and changing part of our city where the revisions for service are really going to be most significant. So I kind of came to terms with that, but I thought it was worth mentioning that initially, to me, it felt a little tactical, but then I realized, no, that is the most dynamic part of the city. That and of course, Ridgedale in terms of its activity. But I settled my concern with that thought. So I don't know if anyone else has any other comments that you've got. So other than that, then I think we're ready. Thank you. We're in the affirming mode.
Yeah.
So, thank you very much. So, I think that's our strategic plan update. That takes us to the preliminary 2025 budget review. And I'm going to turn that back to Mike and to Darren. And I think you guys have a report, so
Yeah, thank you.
take it away.
Yeah, thank you. We'll keep this up. Here we have a PowerPoint for you this evening. I'll kick things off. Mainly go through the first half of the slides or so, and then I'll turn it over to Darren. So just before I start, just high-level observation and comment. Just certainly want to thank Darren Nelson, our finance director, Joel Mary, our assistant finance director, Zach Heckel, our accountant, our senior accountant, just for a lot of the work that they've done leading up to tonight. And then, of course, all of our staff that are in the room here tonight. As you know, our budget process is 9 months long. It takes a lot of effort, not just from myself, but from Mr. Nelson, the finance team, but all of our directors and a lot of our managers are involved in really pulling together a lot of the detail that goes on into the budget process. And again, we're covering tonight the general fund, but in total, when you look at our general fund, our capital improvement budget that we discussed a couple study sessions ago, our economic improvement plan, our budget exceeds $100 million. So there's a lot of work that goes into making sure we balance and that we're fiscally responsible, because we do have a big responsibility as stewards of the taxpayer money. And so as we go into this conversation, many of these slides and charts you've seen before, but it is updated from the budget kickoff information that you saw earlier this year, and it's even updated from the packet that was sent out on Thursday. So you're going to see some revised numbers, and I think in our conversations today, Council, I chatted with all of you about a change in the levy, just based on some new data that was unearthed, if you will, the last couple days after the packet went out, and to the good. And so tonight is again, a starting discussion. Darren will talk about the timeline here in a little bit, but just keeping in mind that in September, you will need to approve a preliminary tax levy. And you've heard us say this before, that is the ceiling, if you will. So by December, you'll need to approve a final tax levy that could be lowered in that final decision in September, but it certainly cannot be increased. increased. And so that new ceiling, on to the next slide, is over on the right-hand side, a 9.30% increase. In the staff report and in the packet that was sent out, it was 9.66. So as, again, our staff is continually revising numbers, exploring operational expenses, revenues as well, and always fine-tuning where we can. And so again, since the packet went out, we were able to find savings really in salaries. There was a calculation that was adjusted and was adjusted in a way that we had overestimated for salary structure throughout the city, and so we're able to reduce that expenditure by about $300,000, which then projected it, our new projection is 9.30. So with that in mind, again, we want to go kind of first through what are the budget drivers, and that's usually a phrase that we use is what are the main budget drivers. Before I do that, certainly I'm going to skip over to, oops, I'm sorry, I had my mic off. So I'm going to skip over to the center part of that and really, again, set the stage for property taxes. And in the middle of the graph, there are three components that really drive property tax. It's our operations, our capital, and then debt service. And that's illustrated on the circle graph over on the left-hand side. The biggest piece is 78%, which is our general fund operations. So again, the bulk of our expenditures related to property taxes are in our operations, which we'll get into here in a little bit. The second component is the capital, our CIP, Capital Improvement Program, is 18%, and then the existing debt service that's tied to the general fund is 4%. So again, have a breakdown of where our property tax dollars fund and where those dollars go. Now, as it goes back to, on the right-hand side, 9.3%, and I just mentioned budget drivers. So the three main budget drivers are, is they often will use buckets. So we'll talk about three different buckets. The first bucket is in our general fund operations. And I'll just, our mouse, use the mouse here. So as we break down that 9.3%, operations is 7.23%. And that's where we're estimating today. Further breaking that down is general operations at 4.98%, and I think just for the discussionary purposes, the rest of the way through, I'll say mainly 5%. So really 5% of that 9.3 is for general operations. That's doing business in 2025 as in 2024, just in a different inflationary environment. So it's really the same operations as we see today. There's a staff ad that we'll talk about later, but in the general sense, it's really funding what we're doing today for next year. That's at that 5%. The other component is the Public Safety Master Plan. So as we heard here in the last hour, both Chief Fox and Chief Warboom recapped the Public Safety Master Plan, and we are in year 2, or this would be year 2 next year in 2025. Again, that's being at this point a budget impact of that 2.25%, and that takes into consideration the positions that were discussed again this last hour. There are no changes to the capital improvement part of the levy, so our CIP dollars, even though we have expenditures resulting next year in our CIP, no increase needed in the levy for capital. And you'll see a slide coming up on that. In terms of debt, what is being projected is a 2.07%, and that would be debt service for potential community facility improvements, and that is, go back to the study session a few months ago where we had staff and our consultants lay out some options for the council consideration regarding improvements to the marsh, to the community center, Williston, and then there'd be the repayment of the initial purchase. So that debt service is estimated at 2.07%. We'll probably get into a little more details here in a few minutes in terms of what that looks like. That debt issuance is tied to a potential bonding issuance of $37 million. Again, those are numbers that we saw in a recent study session at $37 million. Principal and interest payments estimated today, if the debt was issued, would be a little over $3 million a year. And so to pay for that principal and interest payments, it really requires a 6% levy increase. And so what this estimates is then phasing in that tax levy the next 3 years, with year 1 being 2%. Certainly, we could talk more about options in terms of what that might, other options here later on. So it gives you just some background into the three again, categories or buckets, as I've called them, in terms of what are those main budget drivers. That same information is laid out in a bar graph, and that's illustrated here on this page. Dates back to 2016. Really the purpose of showing you this is to highlight, dating back almost the last 10 years, again, those three different categories. The blue is the capital improvement programming. I know you've seen this before many times, Council, so we're looking at 2025, again, very reflective of 24 into 25, very similar. I just noted a 0% increase or decrease in the levy for capital. Operations is the biggest driver in next year, and again, we'll cover that more detail in the coming slides. And then with the debt service, again, being, unless we, this factors in that 2% levy increase for the debt service if we were to fund the facilities. Breaking down our capital improvement program, so I again mentioned our CIP, there is a 0% impact going to 2025. What this graph illustrates is with many of our different funds that are where capital improvement dollars go, you can get a sense of where the biggest bulk of our CIP tax levy goes to. Those are reflective in the blue colored areas in each of these bars. So for example, we have a street improvement fund, which primarily funds street improvements, obviously, as the title suggests. The largest portion of our, I'll back up here for 1 second. So think of 9.876 million in levy needed to fund capital improvement projects. Where does that roughly 876 go towards? The major share of that, over 6 million, goes to street improvement funds. Another share goes to capital replacement. That's generally where we see equipment, so squad cars, fire trucks, dump trucks, payloaders, skidsters. So really a lot of our equipment falls into that capital replacement account. We also have a technology development fund that pays for all the technology really across the city. So we do break that out through that tech fund. Public safety has a separate capital need really related to equipment. So radios and armor and helmets is what you would find generally in public safety dollars. And then trail improvement is there's a small portion of the tax levy that does fund park and trail improvements. And then the last piece would be forestry. So there's some dollars that go to our forestry fund. There are lots of other funds in the city. We have roughly 40 in total, but these are the ones that are most reflective of where tax levy dollars go. Breaking this down a little bit further is what's illustrated on this next slide. And so, as you heard me say just a few minutes ago, 4.98% is really dedicated towards, as we say, kind of continuing the business and maintenance of the city as we are in 2024, carrying that over into 2025. And, whoops, sensitive mouse. If you look at the budget drivers within that 4.98%, I'm just going to quickly go through these. 0.5%, or roughly $250,000, is for the last year of our ARPA levy reinstatement. Mr. Nelson's talked about that numerous times in past years and study sessions, how we've used the ARPA dollars from the federal, through COVID and the federal funding. So this is our last year of that levy component of $250,000. And then the rest is really related to people. Roughly 80% of our general fund budget is related to people. As you know, we are in the service industry, and so what we have reflected in here is then our annual cost of living adjustments, market rate adjustments, both in our union and non-union contracts, and then non-union employees is the biggest share of that. So again, salary adjustments going into next year. We did have the staff report. We talked about some good news on that front, that our increase was minimal at around 6.5%. We've seen more double-digit increases the last couple of years, so health insurance this going into 2025 has been lower than previous years, but nonetheless, there's still a impact to the city, and there's a cost share between the city and staff as it relates to premium increases. The city share is roughly $284,000 for health insurance. We had an increase in workers' compensation insurance this year to the tune of $475,000, which is almost 1% of our entire levy just due to workers' compensation premium increases. And then the new position that's being requested is DEI specialist. That is $95,000. That would be a mid-year hire. I should say first first quarter April hire, so right at the end of the first quarter, and the second quarter hire, and that has a levy impact of 0.2%. So that's a summary of 5%. So really 5% is really driven around, again, salaries and benefits and one position being recommended for next year. As I noted, again, the other piece is the public safety component, 2.25%. The community facility improvements or that debt service, which would generate about $1 million for more interest payments in year one, is 2%, again, which gets you to a projected levy of 9.3%. We'll also talk about HRA. We've been consistent over the years with an HRA levy of $300,000, so no adjustment being recommended there. One of the things that this next graph illustrates is a little bit of a look back and then projecting future tax levies. And you see Mr. Nelson prepare our financial management plan, and in that planning effort, we take a look at where we've been, and then we project out where the potential tax levy could be in future years. So a lot of assumptions go into that modeling, but we take a look at current operations, we use inflationary factors, we consider what staffing costs will look like, we also consider what debt service might look like in future years. Really everything from A to Z regarding city expenditures, we try to do that forecasting and modeling to understand what could potentially happen with our tax levy in, again, out years. My apologies, very sensitive mouse. So again, in as we just noted, 2025, going 25 at 9.3%. Projecting out in 26 and 27, some significant increases, primarily driven around the public safety master planning and the implementation of the public safety master planning. And we start to see some easing in the tax levy further out in 28, more so in 29. And we're going to talk about in some upcoming slides, some other considerations that we need to be planning around in the next 5 years, beyond some of the things that we're talking about here already this evening. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Nelson, talk about what's in the budget, what's not in the budget, and then as we get towards the end of the presentation, we have questions for you, and then we've got one of the slides coming up on are there ways to reduce the levy from 9.3 to something lower. And so we have some suggestions and recommendations for your consideration, so we look forward to vetting those out with the council here in the coming minutes. So with that, I'll turn over to Darren, and we'll continue with our presentation.
Thank you, Mike. Let's grab this here real quick. I want to just go back real quick and just on this graph here, looking at 26, 27, and 26 and 27, that also includes the community facility potential bonding issuances there as well too. So it's public safety master plan, and then the community facility bond issuance stepped into over a 3-year time frame. That's why those 3 years are a little bit higher than it backs down in 28 with public safety still there, and then 29 where it's all done at that point. So so what's in the budget? Looking at these bullet points, I think we've talked about some of these already, so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on these. We've got the first bullet here is to talk about the public safety master plan. We've talked quite a bit about that already tonight. There are obviously, as we stated, there's a request for 9 firefighters and 1 police officer investigator within this budget. Looking at the community facility improvements, there again, we've kind of talked a little bit about that. That would be a bond issuance potentially in 2025. This would be levy dollars in 25 to pay for interest on any bond issued for community facility improvements that we talked about earlier as well. So, and that would be stepped into over a 3-year time frame as mentioned earlier. We have one other new position within the general fund, and that would be a DEI specialist, and that would be funded obviously through the general fund and with tax dollars on that end of it. We do have 3 non-general fund personnel requests as well too. We'll go through those personnel requests in a little bit more detail in a second here, other than the public safety ones. We are implementing the second year of our class and compensation study plan. We had done a study last year to get all of our non-union employees into grades and steps. That was a big project, and now we've got them all in there, and we are working on continuing the implementation of that plan as we move forward on that end of it. So that is built into the budget here as well, along with all of our union contracts and their projected increases there. Workers' compensation, as Mike mentioned, is increasing quite substantially for this next year. We're seeing an increase of about $475,000, which is substantial for workers' compensation. It's kind of twofold on this end of it. We are seeing increasing rates across the state for different classifications of workers. And then our mod factor as well too increased last year from 0.69 to 0.87. Mod factors, it's kind of a technical term on that end of it, but it's the multiplier basically on what you put on your insurance, workers' comp insurance premiums. And so anything below a 1.0 is good. That reduces your premiums. So our 0.69 was outstanding. We were actually, I think the year before, we were actually, it was lower than the 0.69. It was either in the 0.5 something around that end of it. And it has kind of now gone up a little bit, but it's now at 0.87, which is a 32% increase from 0.69 to 0.87, but that's still in the good category. We could easily be, cities are at a positive, that are a 1.2 and something to that nature. So we could see significant changes. And so we're implementing our safety committee in hopes of, as part of that is the hopes of bringing that down and hoping that mod factors and classifications across the state try to moderate as well too. So that's a big hit to us, but overall we're still in a good setting. It's just a bigger increase from our reduction from last year. So
It's good, just not as good as it was.
right. So our new staffing requests, I'm not going to go into these in details. Both chiefs did a great job of that. We obviously have one on the police side of it and 9 on the firefighter side of it. I do see I have to update the first bullet under the 9 full-time firefighters. That's for an additional 18. I think that number needs to be tweaked from that going forward. But Kevin and I will get that squared away moving forward on that end of it. So those full-time firefighters will allow us some staffing flexibility and be able to staff up Station 5 on that end of it as well. And then our DEI specialist, I think I'll spend a little bit more time on that one, is that DEI continues to be a top priority for the city council and staff, and we are seeing some lots of demands on our current senior DEI person, and so we're seeing him going in a number of different directions on that end of it, and I was kind of wanting to expand that and provide additional outreach and such like that. There is a need for some additional staffing on that end of it, and Mike and Miranda can touch more on that if you need more specifics on that end of it. So then looking at some of our non-general fund FTEs, we do have a request for 3 positions there. We do have a request for 1 public service worker 2 out in the utilities, water and sewer division. We do have our water meter replacement project that is kicking off now. That's going to be a 4, 5, 6 year program on that end of it. That'll be a big need for us there, along with inspecting critical infrastructure, doing our sewer televising, those types of things. And that position would be funded from the water and sewer utility fund itself and not from the tax levy dollars themselves. And then we have a request for 1 program and event coordinator at the Marsh. This would be needed to operate various programs the facility users are requesting, so we're getting lots of requests for programming, but also handle a number of rentals and special event requests that are coming in out there as well. And this position was recommended in the community facility study that was presented to the council an earlier date. I don't remember if that was this spring or when that was. But that position was there. And then one other position is 1 senior fitness coordinator, and that would be kind of a split between the Marsh and the Wilson Center. We currently have 1 position now that is split, and so this would allow us to have 1 position at both the Marsh and the Wilson Center. Obviously, funding would fund 1 position. Wilson would fund 1, and the Marsh would fund the other position at this point in time. They are seeing big numbers in programming needs, and as well as health and wellness programming there as well too. So those are the non-general fund FTEs, and those would be both funded by both the Wilson Center and the Marsh as a special revenue fund. We do have some non-personnel budget adjustments as well too. I know Mike mentioned in that graph earlier, it showed basically it was all personnel. There are a lot of kind of ins and outs or adds and deletions across the other services and charges areas of the budget outside of the personnel area. And so we do have a couple requests that were in there as well. So we have $100,000 for IT subscription licensing. We're seeing large increases. Every company's moving towards a subscription service, and so with the subscription comes basically an annual 5% increase because it makes it easy for them. So that we're seeing that increase at kind of astronomical rates across the board on that end of it. We also added another $100,000 for electricity charges. As you may recall, PUC and Xcel Energy, I'm on the record of saying that I think they're in cahoots with one another, but they had a change to their community solar gardens and their rebate on that, and so that's going to reduce our rebate by about $100,000 for next year, so we'll have excess additional costs for next year on that end of it. We're also including $100,000 for a potential zoning code rewrite, and that I think is a 2-year potential project on that end of it, with potentially some funding coming back from Beck Council in the second year of that project. And then we have $40,000 for replacement of some permitting software, and then some additional increase for ammunition costs that are increasing, and increased staffing there as well. That cost affords that. But we do have some reductions on this as well too. And so I think I've talked with the council a little bit about our state fire aid. We have kind of come to a tentative agreement with the Fire Relief Association that now that they are moving towards being at the max for the state pension allotment, which is $15,000 a year per year of service, which comes out of their pension funds on that end of it, they're willing to allow the city to take half of their state fire aid that we receive once a year on that end of it. So now that we're growing on the full-time fire department side of it, or the full-time firefighter side of it, we have pension costs there as well too, with PRA and such like that. And so as long as that fire relief pension is at the max, they don't necessarily have a need for it. They are overfunded, so I think they're at about 120%, give or take a couple percent funded. And so they're gracious enough to kind of share that with us, with the city, to help our funding needs on our end of it. So we will be bringing, in September, we're going to bring the preliminary budget forward. The plan is to bring that agreement to City Council as well too, to ratify that agreement. So look for that in the future. We also are eliminating, we had in the preliminary budget kind of up until late in July timeframe, we had added up $250,000 into the budget for operating the marsh. Initially, our purchase agreement went through 23 and 24, and we had some dollars in there to help us get through operating for 23 and 24. And so we thought those dollars would run out by the end of 24. Operations at the marsh are better than anticipated on that end of it, and so we are not going to need that initial $2 million operating cost piece of that. We can extend that through 2025 at this point in time, and so we won't need any additional operating subsidy at the marsh beyond what was initially there with the purchase option on that end of it. So that's realized savings there, which is good, and we'd like to see the operations continuing to go there. We have $60,000 from the savings from our ERP, our finance and HR conversion project. We're not expecting to be paying Oracle for the new ERP project next year, and so we'll be reverting back to our original costs on that end of it, which is about $60,000 annually there. And then we're looking at our fuel savings as well too. We're seeing significant fuel savings in the PD side of things, especially with being able to house police vehicles now with our new facility and such like that. We're seeing vehicles aren't idling as much as they used to be, and I think Scott and his staff are being a little bit more strategic about the patrolling piece of that and things like that. So we're able to save on some fuel costs on that, which is significant as well too. And then lastly, we talked with Public Works a little bit, and Will and Darren Ellenson on some of this stuff about salt inventory. And so had a good conversation with Darren out there about salt inventory and how we have to account for it at the end of the year. And him not necessarily realizing that we as accountants come in at the end of the year and we actually measure how much salt is there, and you can have swings. So one year you may have $500,000 in salt being used, and the next year you may have $200,000 in salt, just because your end of year inventory is adjusted and not necessarily consistent from one year to the next. So we had a good conversation about that. He learned kind of what we do on our end of it, we understand what he does on his end of it, and so we're gonna try to control that inventory at year end on a little bit better basis now. Obviously, year end is difficult because it's December and that's when you use salt, but if we can try plan as best we can, I think we can realize some savings there in the long run, so.
You know, just jump in there. I think we didn't, I guess, add up the top and bottom of that. So if you illustrate that we're adding some components, as Darren mentioned, but we also scrutinize our expenditures. And so I think when you look at those ads and you look at where we're seeing savings, that is washing out. And so going back to my earlier comment, really that 5% first bucket driver of general fund operations is staff. Even though we are adding costs into the budget for the items noted, we're also having savings that really kind of wash that out.
So here is just a breakdown of the general fund services, and so kind of into the category of our programs. And so we have, as you can see, our largest sector, this is just within the general fund. This doesn't include capital or CIP or anything to that nature. So this is just strictly operations. As you can see, public safety, that includes police, fire, and legal, and environmental health as well. That accounts for about $24.2 million of our operating budget, or about 44% of our total general fund operational costs. The other areas in there are all fairly equal on that end of it. Street and facilities, so that's our streets departments. So that'll be just personnel costs there for all street-related activities, and facility activities is about $8.5 million, or 16%. Park and environment, so that's trails, or that's parks, and that's natural resources. There again, that's about 9%, and recreation is about the same at $4.4 million, about 8%. And then you got development and general government is there as well too. And so general government is admin, finance, assessing, all those types of things as well. So we look at the homeowner impact, and we look at values over time. And so this table here comes from the assessment report that was out back in March. You can see the growth for the overall city was 2.7%, which is the lowest it's been in the last couple of years on that end of it. Single family or single household residential is 1.5%. The average median value home increased for about 1.15%, so went from about $495,000 to $502,000 last year, or for this current year. We are seeing a little bit of, still seeing some increases in apartments. A lot of that is still related to some new values coming on board there as well. And then you can see the commercial is pretty flat, so a lot of our commercial value is flat, which is not uncommon across the metro on that end of it. We're not experiencing big decreases at this point in time, so that's good. We're seeing reuses in lots of different areas, so that's encouraging there as well too. But this impacted a 9.3% levy increase would have a annual tax impact of about $185 on an average median valued home, and so that's $15 a month or so, somewhere in that ballpark. So a little bit bigger, but it's a little bit bigger levy than we've had the last few years as well too. So. And so here's another chart that comes from the assessment report that kind of shows a shift in valuation between residential, commercial, industrial, and apartments. And so we saw some big shifts a few years ago when values went up that 15, 16%. We really saw the shift to residential, which then pulls property taxes away from the commercial, industrial, and apartments and moved them over towards residential. And so we haven't necessarily seen that shift go back the other way. It's been kind of holding pretty steady over the last 3 years. We're still seeing a little bit of growth on the apartment side of it, which helps reduce that a little bit, and obviously seeing the commercial and industrial kind of hold steady a little bit over the last 3 years, but it has shrunk over the time if you look at it over the last 10, 15 years on that end of it and such. So there again, it's just a redistribution of how property taxes that are just spread across the city now compared to how they go over a number of years on that end of it. So here's our potential 2025. I didn't relabel this header on this one, my apologies. Here are some of the potential levy increases for some of our comparable cities. I don't have 3 of them. we're thinking a couple of them might be pretty high, and they don't want to really disclose that yet, so they're holding tight to the vest on some of those. But take this with a little bit of grain of salt. This year, we did break this down a little bit different with Minnetonka. So we broke it down between kind of that operations, that public safety master plan, and then the community facility debt piece of it as well too. So you can see there's the 5% or the 4.98%, kind of how that compares to the rest of it in other cities out there. And just take it with a piece of, or a grain of salt, is that every city is unique, every city is in a different situation. I know Apple Valley, Edina have some bonds going on as well too. Edina's trying to get rid of special assessments, which is like a 10-year plan for them to kind of phase that out with some equity pieces in there and such like that. Bloomington, I know, has some fire stations that they're remodeling as well, so they have some debt in there as well. But it's just kind of a piece to take it for the information that it is and compared to where it is. And I will say that, kind of heard it through a grapevine, but I think Eden Prairie's time at the bottom of this chart is, the days are probably numbered on that end of it. So they have a public safety master plan too that they're looking at, so they will
Welcome to the club.
Welcome to the club is right, so. And here's a chart that I would put in. I know there was a request when we talked at either the CIP or the budget kickoff earlier this in May-ish. We were kind of looking at that community survey question where we asked the public, would you support a 1% increase in your property taxes? And we wanted to see what that trend was over time. Had it been, the support been increasing or had it been decreasing? Because we just look at the community survey and we see a 1-year snapshot. And so we went back since 2010 and graphed those responses out. And it surprised me when I got the graph. I was expecting it to be going the other way, like there would be less support for a potential tax increase. And obviously 2010 was a different time. That was, coming through some of the Great Recession stuff on that end of it. But you can see that over time it's been pretty strong support for that piece of it. So here again, it's just some information that's out there. Just wanted to get that in front of you and kind of follow up on a closed loop on that question.
I was the one who pushed for this, and I would call this a very encouraging chart. Because, I was concerned maybe we're getting to a tipping point on that question. And, the data suggests that is not the case. It's, I think that speaks to the fact that our residents perceive us as providing a reasonable value for what we charge them, even though we know it's not low. But I found this, I was very encouraged when I saw the trended data, so thanks very much for doing that.
Absolutely.
And I would say, just quickly, that if I know we always laugh when too many charts get overlaid, but if you overlaid the levy increase corresponding with the response, even in up years,
Yep.
the response has still been very positive. So, I don't want to put too much credence in that because we can push it too far, but it is encouraging.
So here's where we kind of wanted to move. Maybe I'll let.
Sure. I'll jump in.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Dave. So this slide talks about, really kind of outlines for you some options for levy reduction consideration. So if the starting ceiling is 9.3, what are some options for you to consider in terms of trying to lower that to something else? One consideration is to delay community facility improvements. As we talked, that would be a $37 million debt issuance. There's nothing really pushing that timeline other than we were encouraged to do the facility study. We wanted to get a good handle of where we were with our facilities. We hired a consultant. They came back with recommendations. I think we were all excited to see what that might look like and those possibilities. And so then we explored what would a debt issuance look like? How could we tackle a potential project and some ways to pay that back? So one possibility is to, again, delay community facility improvements. Perhaps it's operating the marsh another year, looking at what those operations look like in a year from now, and then perhaps considering a project in the future. So there's one way to reduce the levy, and that's, again, kind of holding back and pausing on any type of capital improvement project on our facilities. The need certainly doesn't go away. I know the community center was one of those important aspects, because if you recall, before we got into the marsh discussion, we had bid the community center project. We had rejected those bids because they came in high. We rebid it after some modifications to the project scope. We had some really favorable bids, and we were close as the council. Those were presented to you, and we ended up rejecting those bids to go through this process. So certainly delaying the community facility improvements. I know it has some consequences, because I think we're anxious also to look at certainly the community center and other potential minor upgrades in the facility, in the community. Another potential conversation for you is elongating the public safety master plan. Again, earlier you heard from our chiefs on recapping the study, where we're at, where we're going. We've had our kind of 5-year plan in place. As noted, next year, 2.25%. That includes the addition of the 9 firefighters and a detective. And so certainly a conversation is could that number be altered? Is there something less in terms of hiring? Elongating that instead of a 5-year implementation, a 6-year or longer. So certainly staff is here to answer questions on what that might look like in terms of delaying some of those hires and what those potential impacts might be to the goals that we're trying to achieve through those recommendations. The other levy reduction consideration is talking about the DEI position. Certainly Miranda and I I'll go a little bit deeper, and Miranda also can chime in as DEI became a priority for the city, as it is one of our pillars in the strategic plan regarding community inclusiveness. Our goal was hiring a position. We now have Jace. We started with one person. Now we have Jace on board. That position's been doing tremendous work, but we're noticing that position is stretched very thin as it relates to uplifting a new DEI commission. So there's a body of work and working with a new commission, working with them on getting a work plan pulled together. Our senior DEI coordinator also does all of our in-house training, so certainly a pretty regimented training schedule where all of our staff are being trained on DEI efforts. And then there's the external facing of it, of the position as it relates to doing events. And we've coordinated one event. There are other events planned in the community. We did have DEI interns that did help Jace this last year, but certainly, he's expressed the workload is difficult, and especially trying to continue to move the needle with our DEI goals and objectives. So, but we could delay that position, so we are recommending to fund a position to help in our DEI efforts, but certainly we can look to either delay that position hiring until 2026, or look to make that part-time versus full-time. So there's I think some other options in there. So those are a couple of the considerations for you. Maybe before we kind of dive into that conversation, Mayor, and questions, we have a couple more slides to really finish up our conversation. The other thing I just want to mention is then future project considerations. As we go back to that earlier graph where we project out the next couple of years levy, we know there's pressures. There's pressures that we've talked about here this evening. Some other things that are on our radar screen in terms of planning efforts in the coming years is the fire station remodeling. And so Chief Fox talked about that earlier, that yet this year you're going to have that report coming to you, and we're going to begin a conversation on what that looks like in terms of fire station improvements. And certainly we know there's going to be costs associated with some likely upgrades to those facilities. We've also talked about Opus Park, and so we know at some point we're going to be needing to make investments in a community park in that area. We've gone to the legislature the last 2 years for bonding dollars. We recognize that could be a potential project of upward of $30 million, and so really trying to plan for that station opening in 2027, knowing that in our planning efforts, having those community amenities in that area. And then last, in talking with Mr. Manchester, we have a lot of street and utility infrastructure needs coming up. Some more street and utility projects as our infrastructure is aging. And so we're going to be mindful of other potential projects. As you know, last last couple of years was our largest infrastructure project in history, $30 million in the street improvement project, just down Minnetonka Boulevard. And so we have other future needs that are identified in our CIP that are unfunded. So I really share that with you because of just being mindful of where our priorities land. There's a lot of budget pressures that we talked about earlier, and then being mindful of how do we continue to look at these potential expenditures and fitting those into our projects, and then also being mindful of the tax levy.
Thank you, Mike. And just to finish up, a couple more quick slides here, just looking at the HRA levy a little bit as well too. No real changes here from what was presented with the EIP dollar-wise. It's still at $300,000 as what was presented in June. The EDAC though has, however, recommended a shift in how that $300,000 is allocated. I believe they don't have any Homes Within Reach projects scheduled for this year, from what I understand. Or they have a balance in their fund with Homes Within Reach, and so EDAC is recommending moving $100,000 of the $125,000 over to the Pathways program, and remain $25,000 with the Homes Within Reach program for kind of administration costs, those types of things on that end of it, and then would look to reconsider that in future years if there's a need or change in housing types or anything to that nature. So still $300,000 request on there, just a shift in how the allocation would be between Homes Within Reach and the Pathways program on that end of it, with more dollars directed towards the Pathways program. Just a little bit about the communication and the feedback of the budget. Last year was the first year of communicating the budget through Minnetonka Matters, soliciting feedback on that platform, and so that seemed to work out well. We will be doing that again. We always encourage feedback from the public, and that seems like that's the best engagement tool for that, and so we look forward to that. Obviously, truth and taxation notices will come out in mid-November, and so that'll be dependent upon the preliminary levy that the city council sets. So whatever number that is derived at that point in time will get calculated into those truth and taxation statements. Again, that's the maximum levy that you can approve for this year, and then you'll have a final levy obviously in December that you approve at that point in time. We have articles coming out in the Minnetonka memo obviously on that end of it as well too. And then we will share any comments that we receive with the council as well, like we did tonight as well. So, and then just a quick timeline of where we're at, kind of just went through that as well too. So obviously we're at the August 19th. We're looking at the operating budget at this point in time. It's September 23rd is when we'll bring this back to the council for preliminary levy approval. And then we will have another budget study session in November. We'll look at obviously a little bit of the levy. We'll look at the enterprise funds, look at utility rates at that point in time as well. And then December 2nd will be the public meeting piece for the budget, and that's typically where we have the approval done as well. And if by chance that doesn't fall on that night, we would fall back to December 23rd.
Couldn't we do it on Christmas Eve?
Well, with a special meeting you can, yes. We have all the way up until like the 30th first, I think, so.
Or maybe New Year's Eve.
That's such a
Right,
fun
right.
night for
There it
meeting,
is.
even the
So-
23rd.
It'd probably
yeah.
be short.
Right, right. So that's kind of where we're at. So obviously it's a long process. We're halfway through, but we got a lot of the legwork done, and so still a little ways to go, but it's coming up quicker than we'd hoped. So, and then here are just the discussion questions that were in the council packet as well too, about the base operational levy support piece of that at the 4.98%, the public safety master plan at that 2.25%, public community facility study at 2.07%, and then the HRA piece of that at $300,000. So I'll turn it back to you, the mayor, and Mike, if you
All
have
right,
anything else.
and so I'll ask council first, any questions other than these that you have that you'd like to have asked? So, Council, Kimberly.
And I have a couple of my own, and then I'd like to address some of the emails that we received. So when you talk about the Marsh Special Fund that would pay for the position, that's the money we've already allocated for running the Marsh?
Yes and no. It's still so the Marsh runs as almost like an enterprise fund right now. It's not a true enterprise fund. It's
a special fund.
It's a special revenue fund, so it has unique revenues, which is its membership fees, its other fees that are charged for rentals, those types of things on that end of it and such. And so any subsidy needed would come from if there was a deficit there. And so we have enough. Initially, when we made the purchase of the Marsh, it was $4,275. Mike's got it off the top of his head, and then we had $2 million in there for operations for the next 2 years. And so I have those those funds set aside, so at the end of each month, we look at it and say, okay, are you plus or minus, and we'll transfer those dollars over if we need some. Those dollars have been projected to go through 2025 at this point in time. So any new positions that are requested in the budget are coming from that pro forma basically of,
Okay.
here's our
That's what
revenues,
I
here's
thought.
our expenses, what's our bottom line coming out at, so.
So, I mean, said another way, I mean, essentially, those positions are largely paying for themselves because they're also.
Revenue generators.
They're revenue generators, exactly. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, so my other question is, like, when we look at some of these bonds and paying them back and that affecting levy, is it possible to take out like a longer term loan so that you're paying back less every year? And I know you end up paying more, but then that's less that's going to the levy.
Yes, it is likely possible. I would have to talk to our financial advisor on that. I know we made the initial bond payment runs on 20-year payback on that end of it. I'm sure you can go to probably 25, potentially even 30 on that, but I think we probably have the less time the shorter the bond, the less
Right.
interest you pay over time on
Right,
that end of
yeah.
it as well too, better interest rates you receive, so there's a little bit of a tipping point on that end of it, but obviously the final numbers aren't there. The initial runs were done, earlier this spring, early summer type time frame. We don't know what interest rates will be at, so typically we do those pretty conservative, so hopefully we would issue something and the bond comes in at a better rate than
Better
what
than
we had
what you-
anticipated, but
Yeah.
it's still not like the last bond we issued back in
Yeah.
2021, so.
Good old days.
Right.
Or the bad old days, whatever how you.
The
Right.
free
Look
money,
at it.
yeah.
Good interest rate environment.
Yeah, I just, like, when we start looking at 11% increases, that's not good. Okay, so, this one email, and I'll just read this. So the suggestion was not to transfer 900,000 to project funds and retain it in the general fund and use general fund reserves to buy down the levy to a more acceptable 4 to 5%. So can you, like, answer that? What's your response to that?
Absolutely, and I'll kind of show you in this slide right here. And so we can absolutely use those general fund reserves to buy down a levy in the current year. But you're then setting yourself up in future years to have to recoup that if you want to maintain your service levels. And so typically what we've done in the general fund is that if we have excess reserves there, we schedule those out in our financial management plan for our CIP. And so we take those and we schedule them out for the next 5 years and say, okay, we have realized excess fund balance in our general fund. We're going to use that for one-time projects and not necessarily ongoing supplemental pieces of that. Like we did for the ARPA dollars that we received a couple of years, or 3 years ago now, we used, I think we bought it down, was it $1 million the first year, and then $250,000 the second year, and $250,000 in 2024 now. When we went from that $1 million to $250, we had to levy back $750,000, even though it saved our, in the grand scheme of things, it saved our taxpayers dollars. But you just have that hit of going back up to that levy increase, going back up to where you were. So absolutely, we can do that. I would advise that we don't do that and use it for one-time projects in the capital improvement fund. But those are all, is a viable option.
And I would just add to that too, in a way, we are buying down the levy, because with that transfer, correct me if I'm wrong, we are buying down the levy, because with that $900,000 transfer, that's excess funds, so it's fund balance. So by transferring over to the capital improvement fund for those one-time purchases that Darren mentioned, if we didn't do that, we would have to levy $900,000 in the CIP for those purchases.
Almost
So
2%.
you're really using that $900,000, may not be in the general fund, but you're buying down the capital improvement levy.
That's how we got to 0.0 for this particular, for
Yeah,
2025.
yeah. And if you remember back to our June CIP session, over the last 4 or 5 years, we've been able to transfer large dollar amounts over to our planned transfers over to our CIP, and we're not seeing those big excess reserves projected in our general fund anymore. And so we're not going to be able to make transfers over to our CIP as much as we had in the past. And so that's going to impact our levy in the CIP in future years as well, too.
Okay.
Paula?
Do you still have more?
Yeah.
Yeah, she still has more.
Sorry. So, last, we received an email from former council member Sheppy. There's a lot in there, so, but I want to address. So, first of all, when he talks about firefighter and our pay rate for the part-time firefighters that it's on the low end. So can you speak to why we pay our part-time firefighters that, and do you think that's the reason you're having trouble with recruitment?
No, I think, so the hourly rate that we pay our firefighters really doesn't paint the whole picture of what their overall package is. So they get an hourly rate, which is what we advertise for, and it's 18 something, I think, Darren. But that doesn't include, when they're working, the city puts an additional $3.70 an hour into their deferred compensation plan. Plus they have their pension. And so, they actually end up with 2 pensions plus their hourly rate while they work. And I wish I still had it. Mike did a really good breakdown of that a while back. But when you look at the numbers over their career and what they can earn in both their pensions and their hourly rate, they're actually making about $37 an hour, which is on par with what our career firefighters make, because they get certain benefits that the career side doesn't get. But we don't paint that whole picture when we advertise, because it's easier to explain it when they come in. And so when we recruit and people come in for our information meetings, we kind of lay out the whole package. So.
Okay. And then talks about the city manager fund and the increases. And so, Mike, could you just tell everyone what you told me?
Sure. Yeah, just go back to Kevin's response. Yeah, he's spot on. So I think it's important to note that, yes, on face value, the firefighter paid on call is that base rate as noted. But again, there's more benefits to that firefighter. They actually earn the $18 in cash up front. Their bigger benefit is when they retire. And so when you calculate out their hourly rate, it is close to $40 an hour. And then, as noted in the city manager, so in our budget, there's departments, and so we have the admin department. Within the admin department budget, there are different divisional budgets. One of those is called the city manager budget, and so there are salaries contained in the city manager budget, which would be, I think there's 4 of us. So it's myself, Ms. Dahman as the assistant city manager, Ms. Falk as the senior management coordinator, Mr. Alexander is our senior DEI coordinator. So there's 4 salaries contained in the city manager budget. Why that percentage is higher than others is that's where that new DEI position is being recommended. So if the council supports that additional position, that position would be, I guess, housed in the city manager budget, and so that's why that percentage increase is more. The other thing that accounts for is also funding 2 interns, and so we did have interns this last year as noted, but we were able to fund those interns out of some other budget savings, but we want to make sure we built in some interns in future years. So there's a little money in there for a full-time position and the interns, and there's some additional supplementary dollars, roughly $20,000, to help assist with DEI efforts. So there's a lot of DEI activity that's accounted for in the city manager's budget. If you took out that position and the interns and some of the DEI support, the percentage increase is around that 9% like you see in the other departments.
Okay. And then I'll just, it's already been up for discussion whether or not we do the facilities improvements or wait and assess later on. But I just wanted to state, I don't agree with the assertion that staff has sort of pushed the March decisions and council has just gone along. It was a council decision to purchase the marsh, and it was a council decision to operate the marsh and try and see if we could get to a point where where we break even or make money. And so I feel like, I mean, yes, we have followed staff recommendations, but I don't feel like we've just been like,
Led by the nose.
led by the nose on
Yeah.
that. And so I will give others a chance.
All right, thanks. Thank you, Kimberly. Deb, do you have it, or was
I
Paula?
had one question. On that same page where it gives the percentage increase for city manager, way up the top, it says uncollectible taxes reduced by 50%. And my question, which I forgot to ask, I ran out of time with Mike because I was sandwiched by other meetings, but I said, how do we know uncollectible taxes will be reduced? So I was just really curious about that.
Absolutely, thank you.
Those are council member taxes?
Huh?
Never mind. That was a little attempt at humor, okay?
So if you look at the revised or the addenda that was sent out, there's a revised page for this summary budget piece of that. And so that number has now been restored back to $200,000. And historically, it's always been $200,000. Prior to us finding some additional dollars late last week on that end of it, we were skinning things down as in any way we possibly could. And that was one area that I didn't want to, but I did reduce it down to $100,000 at that point in time. Knowing where the market is at now because that petitions come out of there as well too. So if we have a commercial property that files a petition and they are awarded a refund on property taxes, that's the line that goes into. And so knowing it's a little bit volatile environment, I wasn't necessarily 100% comfortable doing that. But once we found our correction for some additional funding there, I restored that back to $200,000. So it's where it's at, and it's historically been there. It's good to have that nowadays because of the uncollectible taxes, just with the general economy, along with the petitions that are outstanding there as well too. So that was one area that we were squeezing as best we could to make things fit into the
We appreciate
the 9.63. So.
All right, then, Paula, you had questions?
Yeah, first of all, I just wanted to thank staff. I know you guys have done a lot of work in terms to try to squeeze things as much as you can, and so just know that we recognize and appreciate that, even as we ask questions. It's just part of the process, but I think we all really see tonight and another time the effort and that you're putting into trying to make this a workable budget for our residents, and so much appreciated. I had a couple of questions. First of all, talking about the facilities bonding. So I'm just a little bit trying to understand how this happens if we step into something by, a 2% over each of the next 3 years. What happens on year 4 if we do that general bonding? How does that work? So if you could help me understand that a little bit, I'd appreciate that.
Yep, absolutely. Can if you want.
You take it.
Yeah,
No, you
yeah.
take it.
So as I said earlier, that estimated bond issuance is $37 million. And so if you look at strictly an amortization schedule and you were to pay back principal and interest immediately, that would be about $3 million a year, which requires a 6% levy increase. And so certainly you as a city council can, if you decided to do the project, we could do it would be a 6% levy increase to fully fund that principal and interest right away. And so, I'm sounding a little repetitive, and so the strategy is to ease into that, because having a 6% levy increase in 1 year just for that debt issuance would be difficult. And so it's phasing it in, structuring the debt so you get to that in year 4, that full payment. But once you build in the levy for 3 years, on year 4, you've now got that levy built in, so then there's no other levy increase needed at that time.
You still levy for the principal and interest. You just don't have to levy anything
Above it.
Yeah, we're talking
Anything
about
new.
increases. We're talking about increases, not
From
costs.
the base.
So year 1, you pay a third of the interest. Year 2, you pay another third, 2/3. And year 3, you're fully loaded. You're paying 100% of the interest because you load it in each year. But then the following year, you're still paying the interest, but you're not increasing it at all. So it has no growth impact.
Thank you. That makes
Oh, sorry about that.
No, that was good.
Yep, perfect.
I have another question. So one of the suggestions about bringing the levy down was deferring, was it 2.7, 2.07 for community facility improvements. And so my question is, just knowing what things cost and, inflation's going down, but that just means that the increase of prices is slowing. So, I was just wondering if there are any thoughts about, do we actually even save money if we defer because the price of remodeling or whatever tends to go up over time and never really comes down. And so I'm just wondering, it looks like a bright, shiny object, but is it really? Not all that glitters is gold, as they say, so.
A couple comments, I guess, on that. I think that it all depends. I would say construction, you don't necessarily, there are ebbs and flows in construction, but generally it goes up over time. I think the one area that you may see some savings is that interest rates may come down in a year or so. You don't know how much or if it does or what, but it might have some savings there on that end of it. And then I think I talked about a little bit in the report, is that I think there's some financing options down the road as well too. I know, potentially a sales tax option might be something that's, we're not allowed to do that now, but maybe that changes, and maybe that's not even on the table down the road, but at least it's looking at all your options potentially as well too. So there's some things that are out there, but again, the price of construction may go up as well too. So.
I also had a question, and it's a small amount because the ammunition was only $10,000, but I started thinking about it like fuel. Sometimes fuel prices go down and you kind of front load the purchase of fuel, and I was just wondering, if there was, some big sale on ammunition, can we, do a budget amendment or something that, if prices come down and just get it when prices go down and, just have a surplus for a while or what?
And, we've been tracking, the increase has been going on for years. It's just with all the hiring and the training, we're at the range more often than not. And if there was all of a sudden a fire sale, we have a large enough budget to absorb that. And I think that's what we've done in the past, is just say, what, but I think we're finding ourselves with all of everything costing more money, that buffer is not there as often as it used to be. And so we're kind of pushing our full budget every year. So it was just, it's just about the new hiring, the increase, but we need to, we would buy more if we had to. We kind of pay as we go.
Okay.
And also storing it is not easy.
Yeah, Mayor?
Yep. Patsy?
Okay, so back to the delayed community facilities improvement. Because it seems like we wouldn't be able to delay it just 1 year, right? Because we would come up against this problem even more so, because it's going to go up. Based on this projection, which it's going to, the increase is going to go up next, or 2026, it's 10.40 or that chart.
Yep.
So my point is that if we delay that, if we delay it until next year, that's going to even be a worse problem. So,
Pretty much
right?
the same.
It would
No,
be.
It'd be the same.
It would be the same, but it wouldn't. So in 2028, the increase is 7 point. It's less.
You're just kicking the can down the road.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we would have to kick the can down the road 4 years, right? It seems like because it doesn't seem to make sense.
Although if interest rates drop, then that could be offset some of the.
Okay, so could we go, well, the interest rates aren't dropped yet, so let's push it again?
You can do whatever, you make these decisions each year.
Yeah.
So what you do next year is up to the council that's in place next year.
Yeah, okay.
Which I would assume would be pretty much the same as this one.
Okay.
Paula?
I'd just like to chime in there. There's a couple of things in that we may, look at the other alternate funding. There, next legislative session, bonding, there might actually be a bonding bill next year, and who knows, maybe the
God willing.
following year, there might be, proper, or sales tax options. And then the third thing is, obviously, we're in second year, going into second year with the public safety. So in several years, we'll be able to back that off. So right now, we're looking at a double whammy. It seems to me we've got the public safety and we got the community facilities. Is it worth looking at delaying a year and looking at those options? I'm still on the
Yeah.
fence about that, but I get the point.
It's a good question.
But, we're 10.24 possibly next year, but looking at 7.39 the following year, and then going down hopefully after that, and I'm assuming that's after the public safety is fully implemented. So just some food for thought.
Food for thought. And I do have a question too on the police and fire. We've talked at some length about the fact, or maybe not at some length, but we never overspend our budget as a city, never. As long as I've been here, we've never overspent our budget. And we always, and we establish a policy that's been talked about, whereas when we underspend the budget, the underspending goes into the CIP, and that was a decision that we've made. And so, but one of the reasons we never underspend the budget is because there are things that we intend to do that don't get done as quickly as we intend them to get done, hiring being the biggest example, because hiring is hard. And so, if we looked at the public safety increase and said, you know what, chances are we're not going to get all those hires made as quickly as we say we are, because hiring is hard. We know for paid on call, everything else. So why don't we bet on the come a little bit and say, let's put less money into the CIP next year and say, you know what, we're not going to change the plan, but we're going to change the levy increase from 2.25% to 2%, or take a little bit of it out, because our experience has been that we never hire faster than we expect to. We always hire slower than we expect to. So why don't we just anticipate that a little bit and reduce the levy, because chances are we're not going to need all of that money because we're not going to get as much hiring done as quickly as we intend. We're not going to change the number of people. We're not going to change the target. We're going to do our best to hire on the schedule we've laid out. But experience shows that we never quite get it done that fast. And so I think there might be some flex in there, and maybe you've already taken that flex out already. But I think, because I know you're squeezing hard, but I know that, I've been doing this for over 20 years, and we have never overspent our budget. And so could we, and we found a way to deal with that by putting in the CIP. But in reality, that's not the ideal way to fund the CIP. The ideal way to fund the CIP is say, what do we need in terms of capital, and budget that much, and let's get as close to overspending the budget as we can without actually doing it. So it's a little bit of a rhetorical question, but I think there might be some space in there to, particularly when we know the area where we're doing the most hiring is public safety. Maybe there's an opportunity to not change our plan, but to squeeze a little bit tighter, recognizing that reality is probably going to be closer to that lower number.
Yep, I know you said it was rhetorical, but I'm going to comment just a little bit on that. And I think absolutely in the past, we've done a lot of our hiring as January 1st hires, which probably in the grand scheme of things doesn't make a lot of sense, because you approve a budget in December.
Yeah.
Well, we're not bringing anybody on January 1st.
You don't have job descriptions written by then.
Right, and so what's the reality? They come on, they come on board end of Q1, Q2, somewhere in that ballpark. The last couple of years, last year was the first year that with the Public Safety Master Plan, or the current year, that we brought those on as mid-year hires, and so we were able to then plan for the first half of the year, get those ready to go, and they came on July 1 or very close thereafter. On that end.
So your delivery's been better than I've been giving you credit for.
So in the
And that's okay, that's okay.
Sorry, Mayor.
Yeah. So the kicker part is that works out well then for the first year because it helps reduce those, it gets those actual costs closer to what their actual is.
Right,
Now for next year, now we have to fund those 3 firefighters for the full year, which
Right.
adds to the levy as well too. And
Yeah.
so we're doing the same thing this year with the 9 firefighters for '25, funding them as mid-year hires, knowing that that's gonna have an impact then for 2026
Right.
as well too, so.
But
And kind of to the point too, just the one last point on not making or not coming up to our budget amounts,
Yeah.
being underspent historically on that end of it. We were squeezing the budget this year, and that was one of the items that we brought into the budget is that we, in the police department specifically, because that's got the greatest number of employees, is that
Mhm.
we have the right number funded, or right number accounted for, but we are funding, basically saying, okay, you're gonna have a vacancy historically all throughout the whole year, and so we're reduced the
so you
budget by 1
anticipated my
FTE.
question,
Yeah.
okay, good job. I mean, that's good, I mean, because I think that's what we need to do. We need to be creative as we look at bringing the number in line with what we want. So are there any other questions? Otherwise, we can actually get to the questions we have on the list, but go ahead, Rebecca.
Well, I guess mine's probably more of a comment, so.
Okay, all right, well then,
I'm sorry,
Paula?
just one
Yeah.
more minor question is just, when we transfer excess funds from the general account, general fund over to CIP, what is that paying for in CIP? Is that all trails, or is that various projects?
It's across the board. A lot of it goes to capital equipment, street improvement fund,
Got it.
parks and trails, technology fund. It's kind of wherever we see a need in one of the capital project funds, and so the greatest need will kind of
Great, thank you.
massage it across time. So
Each of those CIP funds have their own balance, so we
Yep.
look at where that need is, where the balance is, and where it needs to go.
So Kizzy, you have a
I
question?
guess I got a question. You stated that the medium price point for homes is $502,000, about $15 a day, annually $185. When you look at the lower price point for a house in Minnetonka, what is that number when you do compare annually and then per day?
yeah, no, absolutely great question on that end of it. And I should note too is that there was a change for property taxes payable 2025 with the homestead exclusion piece of that. That's
Mhm.
increasing.
That's going up.
This year as well too. And so if I look at, so say the 25th percentile, which is a home at $415,000, that's going up $124 or $124 a year. If I look at, say, $310,000, that's like $80 a year. So what we're seeing is that with that increase in homestead market value exclusion, that increased the dollar amount of the exclusion, and it also increased the value of the homes that it included. And so we're seeing bigger increases in exclusion for the lower valued homes, all the way up until that median valued home still received a little bit of exclusion as well too. So all the way up to 517,000 or so on that end of it and such. So really what that does is then
It's more tax relief.
it's tax relief for more affordable housing on that end.
Yeah.
It shifts it, but it's more affordable for, more relief for affordable housing.
I guess I got one more question.
Yeah.
When you think about like, I'll just say the retirement population of folks in our city who maybe bought their homes, I guess in the 50s, 60s. I'll just use my neighbor, been in a house for 40, 50 years. I guess homes paid off. But when you think about like retirement and comparing their income to what the property taxes are, the increases of the property taxes, what kind of impact are we having on, I guess, folks who's retired and living in their homes and the increase in the property taxes? Because I am worried about, lower income families. I'll use me. I always use me. And then also retired
Just the
folks
fixed
that's in their
income.
home
Fixed income.
and having to
Yeah.
continue to increase the property taxes, and how's it impacting folks like that in our city? I mean, how
Well, obviously taxes are nobody wants to have have taxes, but it's kind of a necessary evil on that end of it and such. But I would recommend, and I always try to promote as many of the state tax programs that are out there, the tax saving programs that are out there, property tax relief programs. I know I do that. I do my taxes and I do my mom's taxes. The only taxes I do is inactive CPA on that end of it. So, and I do her property tax relief every year, and I'm amazed at the amount of income you can have, but yet you still get property tax relief on that end of it. So, and it's pretty substantial on what that relief is. So, we try to promote that in our Minnetonka memo. We've tried to do a lot of that, and I want to make sure that the more people that know about that, the better. And I hope that they're getting it done when they get their taxes done, or they're being aware of that, those programs that are out there, because they are substantial and they do benefit lots of people on that end of it. And so we promote it as best we can, as often as we can, but we can't do it for them on that end of it.
If I may, Darren, on a related question, I'm at City Hall quite a bit. I'm in the community center quite a bit. I know that starting January 2, we have people from AARP here to do seniors' taxes. And are they fully apprised? Do we talk to them at all in terms of ensuring that they are informing our residents who come in to have their taxes done that these senior tax, because these are all seniors who are coming in, is there some things that we could do? And I don't know if we are, and chances are they know. Chances are. But on the other hand, what if they didn't and we're missing an opportunity? And they're right there, right downstairs. Maybe we should make a point of, talking to the senior center and just making sure that information is shared with those tax preparers that are coming in as volunteers to help seniors.
Because there is a little bit of timing difference on some of that too. You need your property tax statement. Well, those don't come out until April.
Right.
March, April time, March, I guess, time frame on that end of it. And so if you do your taxes early, maybe you don't have that information, and then you don't go back, and you still have till August to file
Never been
the
a problem at
return.
my house, but doing early.
But it could be if you forget to go back and do it then, or something of that nature. So that's something we could definitely follow
Paula,
up
did
with
you have more?
Kelly. So
Just kind of question clarification. So when we say $185 a year additional tax for, your median price $502,000 home in Minnetonka for 2025, I just want to make sure people don't think that's all, because city taxes are but less than about 30%, maybe a little bit less of your overall tax levy. So I just didn't want to make people that hear, my taxes are only going to go up, $185 this year, even with this levy, because this is just a part of, we are one taxing jurisdiction. So just wanted to kind of clarify that.
absolutely.
Yeah, and the three primary ones are the school district, the county, and us, and they each take about the same amount roughly.
Right.
So 185, if that's the average, become 540, 565. So we've got discussion questions here. Let's just take them sequentially. Comments on the base tax levy of 5%, 4.98%, pardon me. Any comments, thoughts?
To me, that seems like the no-brainer. I mean, that's
Right,
the easy
yeah.
one. It's personnel. There's no fat in that. We could quibble about the DEI position. I think the result of delaying that would be to probably, risk losing our one DEI employee that we have from burnout, and then we're back at square one, and we've probably shot ourselves in the foot. So, and then we're out a bullet because we shot ourselves in the foot.
That's right. We have to replace that. Well,
So I'm not interested in bringing, the levy down 0.1% to, on that piece. So I guess I'm good on that.
other comments, anyone?
Yeah, what Rebecca said.
Yeah, the only thing I want to add to what Rebecca said is that we as a council made the commitment that we supported a DEI commission. And to sit there and start saying, okay, well, we support it, but we're kind of kidding, and we're not going to adequately staff it for it to do its work. I think that's a bad precedent for us to set. It's not just adding a person, it's we made a commitment to DEI as a city, and we said we support that commission. We need to support the staffing that goes with it. So I think it's pretty straightforward. All right, moving on. The second question, support the 2.25% base levy increase of 4.9, excuse me. Does the city support the additional 2.07% for new debt service related?
No, you-
Did I?
No,
You
you
were
were right
right the
the
first time.
first time.
2.25%.
Okay, the 2.25 for the implementation of our public safety master plan. Thank you. I was jumping to the wrong bullet point. I apologize. So 2.25% of our base levy increase going specifically to implementation of the public safety master plan, and we got into the details of that. Comments and thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, we always, I think, the mayor always says public safety is like our number one.
Deliverable?
Yeah, and so, you know, I'm loath to not fund our public safety and the whole 9 versus 6, you know, I want us to be fully staffed, to be able to have people, you know, take a vacation or have a day off and not be paying overtime. So, yeah.
That's what I was getting at when I asked that question
Right.
about is it cost effective even? I mean, to not have enough staff, because overtime is expensive. So it seems like,
Yeah.
it seems like we should fill those positions because it's wasting money, and we got that burnout issue too. Like
Right,
if you're, you know,
Turnover.
working so many overtime hours.
right, and then
Then you're not
if
a
we
good-
lose
Yeah.
staff, then you're paying overtime because you don't have enough
Right.
staff, and so, yeah.
And
I mean,
I'll-
and not to take anything away from Mr. Alexander, but, I mean, if he doesn't, you know, if he doesn't do overtime, nobody's gonna die. But if we have, you know, if we have people in public safety that are compelled to do overtime, they're either burnt out or not adequately staffed. Either scenario isn't really great. And the other thing that you know, sometimes you just have to rip off the Band-Aid. I mean, I was talking to my parents today, and I just moved them here, and, you know, I was telling them sort of what we were considering tonight, and, you know, not happy. I mean, they may not vote for me if I run for re-election at this point, so, you know, not happy.
It's your fault, Deb.
Ouch.
But, you know,
$200.
the thing is that public safety is really our one real mandate. That's at every level of government, and I just want to make sure that we are adequately staffed, and I just feel like if we defer and we don't have full coverage at the fire stations that we need to have full coverage, nothing bad's happened, and we've muddled through, but I just feel like we've been muddling through, and if we delay it, we're just, you know, sort of prolonging the wound, you know, from just kind of letting it fester for a while, that we're not really, you know, treating what's wrong.
And I agree with that, and I'd like to add a couple thoughts, because one, I made my best shot at seeing if we could squeeze that 2.25 down a little bit. I'm satisfied with the answers I've gotten. But the other thing is that when a number of years ago, I mean, and I know that we both love and hate those neighboring city comparisons. I mean, they hold us accountable in some ways, and they also, you know, create some challenges for us. But I looked at staffing per capita, particularly in police. But, you know, for years, we have been a very leanly staffed police department. And so, you know, we were doing with less, on a per capita basis, we were doing with less than Plymouth was, than Eden Prairie was, than Edina was. I mean, we have really, really skinnied that down to the degree that we can. And as Kimberly said it for me, if our residents don't feel safe, they need a different city council. They certainly need a different mayor. I mean, our residents need to be safe, and it's not just the people who live in Lake Minnetonka that need to feel safe. It's every resident of our community who lives, whether they live, in Opus, whether they live in, a $300,000 affordable home. Every resident deserves to feel safe in our city, and we have to deliver that. And we're only delivering it to the degree that the most at-risk people feel that's safe. If we're segmenting on our safety, we're doing the job wrong. So I really believe that this is an investment that we have to make. I'm very pleased that we have the public safety master plan. I support that. And you know what? I mean, Chief Fox and the challenges he's got in terms of recruiting and getting to that 70 paid on call while we make this transition, this is hard work, and it's really important. So I will not support, cheating that at all. I think it's vitally important to our role as leaders.
And may I also say, just knowing sort of the background on paid on call versus full-time firefighters, that what happens in cities with paid on call is that we spend the same amount of money training paid on call firefighters as we would a full-time firefighter, and then we lose them to cities almost invariably that will hire them full-time. And so we are basically just paying the training costs for other cities and not reaping the benefit of keeping them for ourselves. Right. And this is part, this will help address that. Because that is hugely expensive. Even if you just think about other positions, even administrative positions that need minimal training, if you are constantly hiring people that you have to train over and over and over, and it's not even as demanding a job as firefighting, or very technical with all kinds of, special rules, it's very expensive.
Turnover is expensive,
Turnover
and it's
is
more
really
expensive in public safety, I would say.
That's part of what makes me feel okay. I mean, not thrilled, but this is probably what we need to do.
Any other thoughts? I don't want to.
I agree with everything that's been said.
Okay, well, I think, this public safety master plan, it's a little bit like my comment on the DEI decision. We made that commitment to the DEI Commission, and we need to support it. And when the public safety master plan came out, I think we had broad agreement that that's what we need to do. The challenge is, how are we going to do it? And we're answering part of that question tonight. Not the whole question. We don't know what we're going to do next year. But I think we committed strategically that this is the right thing to do for our city. And so we have to figure a way to deliver on that. Any other thoughts or comments? Okay, so there's another 2.07% hanging out there. Does the city council support an additional 2.07% for new debt service related to community facility improvements for a total levy increase of 9.3%? Who wants to talk first?
I'll talk
Rebecca.
first. So I've spent, months tortured about this because it's, really difficult decision. It's in some ways, personally, it's like, yeah, I'll pay it, I'll do it, but I have to think for the whole and not, the individual. I want to do this. I think there's a way to do it down the line, but I think I will say, I've been on the council since 2018. And really, since 2019, we've had our foot on the gas the whole time. We have really done a lot, and I'm glad we've done it all. And I'm glad that we purchased the marsh, And at this point, to see the numbers surpassing everything that we anticipated, I think that there's a way to continue to see it grow. But I just think it is irresponsible in this moment to push forward with this and commit ourselves now and future councils to this without having more flexibility. I mean, we know we have things that are non-negotiables. We know we have infrastructure issues that we just can't negotiate. I'm really worried about the fire facilities, and I just can't. I mean, I hate it. I feel like I can't even look at Kelly because he's put his heart and soul into this. But I think something's going to come together. I have faith, and maybe as the membership grows and we can see how part of, I don't want to put too much stock into, how numbers will make this happen, because I don't think that's going to be the way it completely gets done. But I think it would be irresponsible to go forward with this in this way this year. And I think we should continue to watch the growth. I think there are opportunities, probably even as is, to generate more revenue. I'm not going to say that I think the dues are too low, but I think the dues are too low, even considering the mediocre state of maybe the conditions of the facilities. So that's my thought today. I want to go back to the state on bonding ask. I want to continue to push to get this done, but I just don't think we should keep blazing ahead without a better way to pay for it.
Thank you. Are there other comments?
Well, I think we were talking about, as we defer things, that I asked the question about, costs go up, but I do, you know me, I'm a little black cloud. I never have faith
We
in
know that,
anything.
Deb. Yeah, keep going.
But I do feel like interest rates are going to come down, and I think that will benefit any effort that we put into this if we can be patient. And frankly, I'm still really upset with the legislature, how they're dealing with things like, kind of limiting what we can do and, not getting their one job done with the bonding bill. So I feel like we have an opportunity to hold their feet to the fire because it's their one job. And so I feel like let's put our effort into that. I don't want to defer it for too long. And, having gone through the facility study, there were great suggestions in there, things that I do totally feel that we need to do, but putting it in context of real priorities, I think public safety is really the priority, and nobody's going to die if we don't get to the changes. I feel, I think we have such high standards that we're used to just being so outstanding in every way, and we just hate not to make everything perfect. And I'm a perfectionist, but I do feel like, seeing 3 years in a row of 9, 9.5, 10 point something, it's not sustainable for people. I think we've had the benefit of the study showing, of the survey, sort of giving us some latitude, but I do feel like we're starting to push the envelope at this point.
Other comments, Patsy?
I have to say that I'm relieved, because I was nervous coming here thinking, I wasn't around when the marsh was bought, but this is the thing that I would like, that I agree with everyone, and I was like, I hope, because I was like, I think we should suspend any kind of facility improvements. And I'm sorry, Kelly, but also it feels like, but it does feel like, the fact that we needed to hire somebody because of events, there are more events and stuff that need to be scheduled. So that alone seems really good. And so it's improving already. And so I feel like, I just wanted to say I'm relieved, and I totally agree.
Thank you, Patsy. Any other comments, Paula?
Yeah, comment, question, agree with everything that was said. And Kelly, great job. And so it kind of feels like hard because we were like, you've done a great job bringing this back. We'd like to, kind of keep lifting that work, but totally agree with everybody else. I do have one question though, because part of the talk about the facility study was, kind of needing roofs and, things like that. Is that something that, is going to be okay for another year or something, or is that something that, we don't want the roof to fall in on people, definitely?
Yeah, great question. I think, I don't think the roof is going to cave in. I think there are going to be some small expenditures. For an example, a pool heater, things like that will go out, and we're going to need to put $8,000 to $10,000 into expenditures like that. We're hoping we don't have to put $100,000 to $200,000 in. So we're fingers crossed. Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Anyone
That
else?
helps me.
Kizzy?
My thought process, I know we talked about it before, when we toured the facility, it was one of the things that I thought that we probably could have slowed down on. I know we purchased the building and the marsh, and I know that we needed to put money into the marsh, but it was one of the things that I thought from the beginning, as I started to understand the increase of the taxes and how it was going to impact our property taxes, and just the thought process, because when I think about not having something, a need versus a want, even though I love the marsh, but in my mind, when we're comparing to the cost of people living and eating and some of the other things, to me that is a want and not a need. And now that I'm convinced, because Kelly O'Day just said the roof is not going to fall in, because that's what we were. That's what the conversation was about. Like, we need a new roof, and so now that we know and we're clear that we can go another year.
Our bucket budget may have to go up,
Right.
but it's not going to fall in.
So I do.
Onesie to watch for
Support
sale.
what everybody else has said, and
The only, I know that when we were talking about this too, we understand that to attract people to have events in some of our spaces would take a little investment too. And so there is a little push me, pull you in me about that our spaces really don't attract certain kinds of events that we might be able to get to pay rent that we're not, if we're not going to invest in the spaces. So that was my only, but I mean, this just might not be the year.
Couple. I'm not going to disagree with much of what has been said tonight on this topic. I mean, I'm not going to deny I'm a supporter of the marsh. I'm glad the city bought the marsh. But Mike gets tired of hearing me say, Mike, we got to make the marsh break even. We've got to have it be an enterprise fund. I mean, I've said it once, I've said it 100 times, and he's getting sick of hearing it from me, even though he doesn't have to admit that. Yeah, that's right, whatever, who's counting? But, I think the marsh is important for the community. But I also agree with everything that's been said tonight that, looking at a 9.3% levy, looking at some uncertainty that we have in the interest rate environment that looks promising, looking at looking at the building environment. I mean, the one thing, if we say, okay, we're going to do everything and we're going to put it off a year. Well, labor is going to go up in a year. Mm-hmm. Materials lumber prices have cascaded downward from the from the peak that they had during, and so there are deflationary pressures on construction that we we can't bet on that. So okay, we're gonna hold off because it's gonna be cheaper to build next year. That's not the argument, but the markets for money and the markets for materials are dynamic, And I would say there's as good a chance that those costs are going to go, there's going to be costs that go up and there's going to be costs that go down. But I don't think we're going to face the dramatic acceleration in costs that we've had in in recent history. So I think from a cost perspective, I'm comfortable with holding off. This is not just the marsh, because we've really kicked the can down the road on getting the community center upgraded, and I know that I believe, I don't want to put words in Kelly's mouth, I know that he would really like to get that done. I know Mike Pavelka would really like to get that done, but I think Kizzy kind of used the right word. Is this a need or a want? And while I think over the longer term, it's probably a need for our city and for our brand and for our delivery of what the expectations of our residents have for us, I think it's enough of a want that if we put it off for a year and consider it again a year from now, it's not going to be a huge cost from a hit perspective, a huge hit from a cost perspective. And I think we'll just feel better about ourselves saying, you know what, we're going to be at 7.2, not 9.3. I mean, I just think it's a more livable place for this council, given some of the things that we've confronted. I mean, all the ARPA absorption will be gone next year. I think that I just think that we'll be in a better place, and then we'll also have more information on some of that down the road stuff that is not a want, it is a need. It's public safety related and so forth. So I think I don't want to act like I'm not committed, because I am committed, but I think the picture will be clearer, and I think that we'll be in a better position to position some of these things if we're not coming off a 9.3% increase. I think from our credibility with our residents, I think that's important. So I'm supportive of holding off on this, as much as I understand that there's some pain associated with that.
Can I say
Yes,
one condition?
go ahead.
If we find out in 3 weeks that we get the SAFER grant, then we may want to revisit
And I would agree with
this
that.
conversation.
I would agree
So
with that.
that's the one condition.
Because I didn't hear anybody say we don't want to do this. I heard people say that in the scheme of priorities, it's got to be lower than our other priorities.
Right.
Is that a fair summary?
Yeah.
Yep.
All right, we're getting to the end here. Any other comments anyone wants to make? Otherwise, I'm going to turn it back to Mike so that we can.
The HRA.
Oh yeah, well the HRA is unchanged. I did have one question on that, if I may. Darren, this is for you. When does the $75,000, the 10-year commitment of $750,000 for light rail end? Because I think we're getting toward the end of that.
I think 25 is the last
Yep, it's the
year
last
of
one.
that, I think.
Okay,
Yeah.
so then,
Julie's confirming.
okay, so that
Should
creates
be
some
freed up in
flex in
26, yeah.
Okay, all right, I just wanted to know, because I remember when that was decided, and I'm not gonna, it was decided. So, all right,
I wanted to give a little background on something that I think it was Mike talking about, or Darren was talking about, what the EDAC recommended, and in terms of use of homes within reach dollars. And part of what they are seeing is that it's so difficult to find homes within the price range to purchase that they felt that looking at the success of the Pathways program, which was more successful than people were anticipating, that just seemed to be sort of an easier way to reach home ownership in our community, and with the added benefit that people make full equity on the homes that they purchase through the Pathways program, and also recognizing that through Homes Within Reach, there were other benefits with Homes Within Reach, including financial education and so forth, that some new homeowners would benefit from. So I think they're taking a really wait and see approach in their recommendation, but that's sort of how they got there.
thanks, Deb. All right, any other comments or questions? All right, and did I miss any? Okay. Otherwise, I'll turn it back to Mike, and we can talk about the September study set. Well, 3C is talking about maybe changing the way we do our council meeting schedules.
Yeah, thank you, Brad. This is the point where we let directors off the hook and they can go if they want.
Although I'm sure it's riveting, and but you don't feel obligated to stay.
You don't have a PowerPoint. No, I don't. We take just a couple-minute break.
Yeah.
I
Okay.
think we'll be done in the next, hopefully, 10 or 15 minutes.
Okay, a break is a good idea, pardon me.
Thank you.
Again. We're on, okay. Well, I'm going to just hand it over to Mike.
All right, well, thank you, Brad. So really just teeing up this conversation because each October, staff brings forward a resolution that outlines the subsequent year's calendar. So coming up in October, I think it's the second meeting in October, which is the 28th. For that regular meeting, staff will bring forward that resolution. We have the calendar laid out for all of 2025. So if there are thoughts or proposed changes, now is the time to kind of flush that out a little bit, because then we're another year away for 2026. And so a couple things I think I'd mentioned recently at a study session, and it's in front of you. I did prepare, obviously, a big staff report. Really just wanted to pick your brain on three things. One is, does the council desire to move meetings on a different night? And the only reason that I ask that question is our packets get long. They can be, as you know, anywhere from 200 to 800 pages. There's time that you spend as a council on weekends getting acclimated and getting ready for a council meeting. I think what's come up, at least what's been questioned to me in the past has been, well, can we get the packets out sooner? Instead of Thursday, can we get them out on a Wednesday, or can we get them out on a Tuesday? There's just a lot of gymnastics involved in doing that. We just have such a routine in place of how everything's are structured to get packets out on a Thursday. So moving that, it would be difficult. But the other option is, well, do you want to move it to perhaps meetings to a Tuesday night? There are many cities around us that do a Tuesday night. Plymouth does, and I didn't do extensive research, so just anecdotally as I talk to my colleagues in other cities, Tuesdays are also a pretty common night for meetings. That would give Mondays another day for the council to prepare for a council meeting. So that's the first question is, do you want to move meetings from a Monday to a Tuesday? If the answer is yes, we would need to work with the city attorney because we'd need to change the rules.
The charter?
Not the charter, it's the council rules of procedure, so
Okay.
it's a different document
There might also be something in the ordinance.
in the ordinance. We'd have to
Yeah,
look.
yeah.
So we'd have to put some structure into place and some other approvals in place to make that happen, the unintended consequence of that is, we do have other public meetings on Tuesday night, so we'd have to look at shifting around perhaps, I think it's planning commit, is not planning.
No,
it's,
no.
Well, let's, yeah.
Sustainability meets on Tuesdays, DEI meets on Tuesdays.
So
So there's some
let's-
other gymnastics involved in that
Yeah,
as well.
just to kind of move things along, does anyone love the idea, or is it an idea? I mean, because I think there's a lot of things that would have to change. If somebody really thinks, boy, that would improve my life a lot, let's hear about it. If it's kind of come see, come saw, it's kind of come
If there's
see,
not,
come
I'm just
saw.
asking the question, if there's
Yeah.
interest, great, if not, staff doesn't have an opinion.
I will say, I haven't long enough sense of history. It used to be that packets came out by noon on Friday. We didn't get them on Thursday afternoon, we got them by noon on Friday. So that was less time, still had Monday meetings, but that's just a little history perspective.
Yeah.
Any thoughts?
I'm just gonna say personally, like, I would just get to the packet a day later.
Right.
If I had that extra time, it's not gonna, I don't, like, if people wanna change the meeting, I'm willing to entertain that conversation, but I don't think for this reason that it's enough to go through all the stuff that we'd have to go through to make that change.
And I will say, even though I don't have a day job anymore, but when I did, having a Monday night meeting and being able to travel the rest of the week, I could always work my travel around a Monday meeting. As we think about a different council at some point in the future, when we have people who have full-time jobs or work for businesses or whatever, I think having the meeting on a Monday is a huge advantage if you have any travel expectations. If you don't, it's not a big deal. You can switch. But I think that's a big consideration as we consider attracting diverse people with diverse backgrounds to our council.
I know that, I mean, I've been on the council for a while, but I remember what it was like being new, and I know that my colleague to my right, you know, it was a lot. You're drinking through a fire hose, and, you know, new council members often ask, you know, can we have an extra day? Can we move when we get the packet? But you get used to it. I've acclimated, and I just feel like it would be so much shifting for staff to have meetings on a different day. I mean, unless staff really was like, you know, hallelujah, finally they're going to change it to Tuesday. I'm good where we are.
I feel that way, even though I like Monday Night Football. I will admit that, and I miss that quite a bit. But it's not the driving thing in my life.
Okay.
All right,
Good.
That's one. Okay,
All right,
you
thank
got one.
All right, thank you. And no, to your point, staff does not have any drive and desire. It was just merely as we get ready again for preparing the calendar, if there was a desire to move it, now's the time to think about
And just a comment, understand that preparing that city calendar is no small task.
It is
That's
no
a
small
thankless big job.
I mean, I would be hip to starting it earlier. Is that what you said?
Yes, let's go to the next
Well, that's the
question.
next
All right.
opportunity. You know, that's
I
good.
like it.
You're
That's
moving
good.
us right along, Pat.
We need a
Thank
front
you,
man.
Patsy. We're moving on. So the next question is, well, it's kind of one, so two and three are really interconnected. So the second question asking you is, do you wish to have study sessions the same night as council meetings? So that's
I
kind
do.
of question two.
Definitely.
Yep.
No, I
It gets
can't.
too long, I can't do it.
Oh, wait, not the same night.
The
It's
same
the
night.
Same night.
It's a
Oh, the
Monday
same night as council meet?
I'm sorry, let me clear, yeah.
Some
Let me
council
clear.
Yeah,
have
it's
a
the
study
council meeting.
session before their council
Yeah.
meeting.
And their study sessions only last an hour.
Yeah.
No.
No, it gets too long. Our city council gets too long sometimes.
So the reason I pose that question is we do have meetings 3 Mondays a month. And so there are
I
other,
see what
there
you're
are three, you have a commitment of 3 Mondays a month. And for staff too, the staff impact is we're preparing 3 packets a month. So there's a lot of, again, work that goes into preparing those packets. But if you had 2 meetings a month instead of 3, you free up a Monday night. And other cities, you know, there are many examples of other cities that do this combination of start a study session perhaps at 5, go to 6:15 for a study session, take a 15-minute break, refresher break, start your meeting, then start your regular meeting at 6:30 and go till whenever. So you do like your study session, it's very limited to an hour and 15 minutes.
And the other
requires
thing is, the cities that I've talked to have done it, then that means they have a study session every time they have a council meeting. So you sit there and think, well, we've never completed a study session in an hour and 15 minutes, but essentially it's 2 hours and 30 minutes if you use the
Right.
schedule, because you'd have 2 of them and you break the schedule up. And so it's an option to say, okay, we're going to adjust the time and we're going to have a study session every week, but we only have 2 meetings a week. That means you get two
Mondays a month.
Mondays a month off. I mean, it's a different dynamic. And I'm not saying I don't have a strong opinion, but Mike and I were talking about this, and they said, well, let's talk about different alternatives. Any opinions?
I find that very appealing. To me, it keeps us on task because we have to end the study session at 6:15.
Right. Turn into a pumpkin.
Yep. And freeing up that time. But I also think option 3 is a good option too. But I really think also we're talking about staff who are waiting to the tech from, and we're directors usually, so this is a little more flexible, but their technical end of their workday is 4:30, and then they're waiting until 6:30 for the meeting to start, and that's a demand on them that we could help alleviate it as well.
I don't know. I think the council meetings get really long sometimes, and to have, the study session and the council meeting on the same day? I mean, I guess if the study session stays at an hour and we don't have a long agenda on for the city council, because I usually take a nap. I'm just gonna tell you, I take a nap during the day. So like, if we're gonna do something like that and have a long city council meeting, I mean, like, that seemed like a lot to me. And I guess I didn't sign up to, like, have long days all the time. Like, to me, I guess if it's shorter.
Yeah, so if it would be, yeah, I get it. And
Just-
plus, it would be less prep, because the prep for study sessions are way more now, that if it's only once a month, we have to cover a lot more things, right? So then,
Maybe
the-
half the
Right.
right, it would be, right, it would actually even be smaller than half the packet size, because
Well, and the tone, yeah, and I think the tone and, you know, I mean, I think it's a different rhythm,
It's,
you know, but I think that, you know, I mean, you're doing it twice a month. And the other thing is that, okay, after an hour of study session, and then you're gonna do, I mean, you're gonna have more incentive to be more efficient in the regular meeting, I think, too, just because, you know what, you're having 2 meetings back to back. And I'm not saying one's better than the other. I just think it's an interesting idea, and, you know, there's pros and cons with each.
There's trade-offs.
Yeah.
I think it has pros and cons. I also know that, like, for the days, St. Paul is in a return to office mode. And for me to hustle up and get from St. Paul to get here by 5, some days would be, it would be hard. So I'm thinking about, you know, people who do work and they may not have that flexibility. You know, if we get any new members, I think that's a lot. And then we have to understand that we're basically adding another packet's worth of material to what sometimes is a really long packet that we only have that much time to read. And if it's a really difficult agenda where we have a lot of community engagement, and, you know, even if we make efforts to make it be efficient, it just can't always be short. I think that gets really hard.
You know what, as I listen, correct me if I'm summarizing wrong, but to me, it sounds like it's an intriguing idea that we're not ready to pull the trigger on yet. And I think that, but I think before we had this conversation, nobody was really, or few council members were really thinking about this. So we need to make a decision because we need to get the schedule out. My recommendation would be, let's not change anything at this juncture, other than if we want to talk about changing a start time from 6:30 to 6, if people would, I mean, we could talk about that a little bit. But other than that, I think changing the structure is not something we're ready to do, but I think we should put that on the table, and it's something that we could consider next year. So then we can, you know, we can really think through the pros and cons and have some really good conversation. But I think suddenly changing it, I think, would be a problem.
I think
for
it's really
most of our council.
intriguing.
Yeah.
I just think it warrants a deeper conversation.
Yeah, I think it does too. And then I just raised the question, are we satisfied with the 6:30 start time, or would an earlier start time be preferable? I don't think we talk about a later one.
earlier.
Yeah, I'd say earlier, too.
Anyone? 6 o'clock, would people like to start at 6 o'clock?
I mean, yeah.
Food ready at 5:30?
I gotta give and take on some things. So
Pardon
I
me?
guess, I said I gotta give and take on some things, so I guess, yeah, that's fine.
I mean, with the idea that this is, that we're not just adding on
Right.
another
Right,
half
right.
hour.
Like, yeah, so
Well,
we don't stay the same amount of, thing,
Yeah.
like, we don't stay
Yeah,
till 10.
we don't leave,
So-
well, the legal requirement to extend a meeting happens at midnight. We still want to avoid that at all, at
Right.
So
virtually
then
all
we have
costs.
to be here at what time? What time would we have to be here?
Well, if we started the meeting at 6, you know, normally, we'd probably, if
Oh, yes.
dinner would be probably available at 5, and
5:30.
most people would come at 5:30.
Yeah. You'd have to be here at 5:55.
Right, okay, that's fine.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
can
Right,
make
you don't
6
have
o'clock.
to,
Yeah,
yeah.
you don't have to.
technically, you want to be
but
here
yeah.
by
Yeah.
6 o'clock.
Yeah.
Is there reasonable
Plan, you
consensus
know,
on that? Try that?
what is it? EDAC meets at 6.
Yeah, I don't,
Yeah.
do you know all the start times?
EDAC meets.
EDAC is the only one that starts at 6. I know when we talked in leadership about this, if council did it, all the other liaisons were hoping to follow.
Okay.
And is that something that staff would appreciate? I mean, would they
Yeah,
prefer?
what
Okay.
staff, what's
This one,
staff?
of the two questions we've posed to you, I think this one would be very welcomed by
Okay.
staff. For what you've already said, you know, technically our day ends at 4:30, and so we have, you know,
If you can compress it, the better.
You
I
can
mean,
compress it, and
nobody likes staying late. I mean, the sooner we can get done, the better, but we also want to get our work done. So I think that'll facilitate that. I think that's positive.
I have one more ask. Can we, if we don't need to approve the budget on December 23rd, can we please try to manage the agenda so we could maybe cancel that meeting?
yes,
Yeah.
Thank you.
yes, absolutely.
Well, you know, and that's another question that I've talked to Mike about. And there was a time a few years back where in the summer, I think it was in July and August, we tried to have only one regular meeting a month, just to reduce the number of meetings. And, you know, then things come up and you do get into the 60-day rule and things like that. But I think with care, you know, and understanding what the agenda item is, I'd be interested, maybe not formally making that change, but be interested in if staff can make it work out, that we could cancel a meeting because our agendas are typically lighter in the summer. So would have the flexibility to say, okay, we can get all our work done in one regular meeting in July and August and maybe even September. I mean, you know, and have that opportunity and, you know, have the opportunity to cancel a meeting rather than rigidly have to have a meeting because that's what our procedure calls for. How do you feel about that? If we can get away with fewer meetings in the summer, would people like that?
Because those 2 July meetings we had this year could have been one meeting.
Yeah, except, you know, then you might have an application,
yeah.
you know, we don't
No,
control
no,
that,
But that
you're
would have
right.
been an example of
Yeah.
when we could have done that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so the idea is not that we're getting rid of a meeting, but we're going to look at it opportunistically. Now, I don't know legally, you know, we have to put a certain amount of notice and so forth, but I think if we had a general attitude that we'd like to get away with only having one regular meeting in, you know, 2 or 3 months of the year to the extent possible, I think that would be positive, and I don't think the public process would be damaged. So I throw that out as a thought.
Yeah, we'll likely schedule it like we normally would for
Right.
July, August, but yes, staff will be really aware of trying to condense it to one
Yeah,
meeting.
making that an objective.
Yep.
All right.
And then we'll
Okay.
Green and I will look at the ordinances, and if we have to, whatever we have to do to change the meeting time from 6:30 to 6, we'll bring that forward.
Okay. So then, that brings us to our final item,
Yes.
is our next, our study session plan,
Yeah, I gotta look at myself here. What do we have coming up?
September.
Community.
How to engage volunteer groups.
Oh,
Um,
oh, right.
It's kind of late.
30-minute free time. it says.
30-minute free time.
So we have, let's see here. It should be a pretty manageable agenda. So, I don't know, Brandy, anything you want to talk about the city manager review process?
Yeah, we're going to bring a speaker in just to talk about how to score and give a review to an executive position, and then just walk through the process for our newer members on the council.
So that'll be fairly short conversation. Then we'll talk about roles and responsibilities for volunteer community interest groups. We'll do
Now, when we say that, what, cite some examples. I mean, is that like the Friends and things like that, or what? I just want to make sure I'm clear on what those groups are.
Correct. I think this was when we developed this study session work plan for 2025, rewind the clock last year. I think it was a more heightened issue, just how do we work collaboratively with some of the more special interest groups, like it's not just the Friends, but we have other, like there's a
But that
housing.
type, yeah.
Yeah, there's a housing advocacy group. There's been another group that's, I think, recently formed about environmental, climate, and so
Yeah,
just
okay, yeah.
just how do we interact and where do they fit into the decision-making process? So just kind of having that conversation. We'll have the community inclusiveness strategic plan update, and then we built in 30 minutes open time. We try to do that every quarter. Again, we start at 6:30. Study sessions were meant to be done at 9, but we do have, I think, some free time. So if there's something there's a burning issue, I think there's space on that agenda to bring something up.
Have we
Kimberly?
scheduled my extra,
In October, so if you look at October, Kimberly, I think we have the worker protection law conversation.
okay? And did we decide on talking about the tree ordinance or not?
Didn't we decide that that was a more complicated issue we were gonna talk about next year?
Yeah, I can't remember what the final decision
Yeah,
was.
we went round and round on it.
I put it on one of the lists that I maintain, I think, so as we frame up the 2025 study session work plan, that is on that
On
list for.
2025,
Yep.
okay.
And I think I agree with that, because I think it's an important issue, but it's gonna take some effort.
Okay.
So, all right, is there anything else? Paula?
Do we have to wait until next year to start moving back our study sessions to 6 PM? Or is that has to go into effect starting next year? Or are we talking about starting this sooner?
It would be for 2025, so
Okay.
the start times, to clarify, good question, the 6 o'clock start time is, I'll work with Corinne on what that official change looks like, whether it's a resolution or ordinance or policy change, we'll explore that, bring that back to you. But ideally, that would be for starting in 2025.
And that's all council meetings, both regular meetings and study sessions?
Correct,
Got it.
correct.
Thank you.
All right. Anything else? Okay, we didn't get done by 9 o'clock, but it's not 10 o'clock, so we'll count our blessings.
Thank you, Council, great conversation on the budget.